Chapter 1195. To a greater demon at the last day's realm, the former was more important than the latter in the end when comparing his true form and a star ocean door. Whether it was the Great Sage, the Golden Rock Great Sage, or the White Tiger Great Sage, they might not be able to make their true forms explode on their own initiative without suffering serious damage. But even if they had the ability to do so, most of them would rather give up the Star Sea Gate in order to preserve their true forms. Therefore, in Lin Feng's eyes, the enchantress's actions at this moment were undoubtedly extremely abnormal. Unless... Lin Feng's eyes flickered slightly. Unless there is a way to reconstruct their true forms. Otherwise, which great demon in the Dharma-ending realm would dare to do this? But even if the enchantress was extraordinarily talented, and could do what others could not, reconstructing her true forms was definitely not an easy task for her at her current realm. The self-destruction of her true forms would also greatly damage her vitality, and she would not be able to recover for a long time. With her current actions, even if she could successfully escape, she was destined to be unable to stir up trouble in the upcoming war between the two realms. She could only find a place to cultivate and recuperate. Generally speaking, when a great demon in the Dharma-ending realm was at its peak, it was impossible to self-destruct. But if the true forms of a great demon in the Dharma-ending realm at their peak really self-destructed, the terrifying power that erupted in that instant could destroy heaven and earth, and was far more terrifying than the collapse of a medium-class world. The true forms of every great demon in the Dharma-ending realm were closely connected to the vast thousand domains. Once they collapsed, the vast thousand domains would be affected. At this moment, the enchantress's true forms were destroyed, causing the void around the Spirit Abyss Mountain to shatter together. Except for the areas covered by the radiation of the Spirit Abyss Mountain and Yujing Mountain, everything else in the world was constantly shattering, and then turning into nothingness. The earth was completely annihilated, but it did not become a bottomless abyss, nor was it a deep ravine. Instead, it completely returned to nothingness, as if it was a piece of chaos. The blue sky above their heads also disappeared, bit by bit, and then completely turned into a dark void. In almost an instant, the Spirit Abyss Mountain Range and Yujing Mountain were like two huge islands floating in outer space. Above and below them, there was only chaos and nothingness. The horizon also disappeared. As space distorted, the vast world around the Spirit Abyss Mountain seemed to be annihilated along with the enchantress's true body. Under the turbulence of time and space, Spirit Abyss Mountain and Jade Capital Mountain seemed to have completely left Tianhuang mainland. Only a black stream of light extended out from the bottom of the Spirit Abyss Mountain. It was hard to see in the void as it extended into the distance. Beyond the endless void in the distance, one could vaguely sense the domain power of the Great Thousand World. This black stream of light was the connection between the Spirit Abyss Mountain and the vast thousand domains. After all, it was the ancestral land of the primordial demonic ape race, the demon race's divine mountain, that Jihuang Xinyuan had once managed in the past. But even so, this terrifying power was still shocking. The Great Sage and Zhu Yan Great Saint could feel that the area where the Spirit Abyss Mountain used to be on Tianhuang mainland was now filled with domain crack. The violent and chaotic domain power was constantly wreaking havoc, and it was also constantly repairing the wounds of the vast thousand domains. And in front of them, the enchantress's true body exploded, stirring up a wild storm that was constantly shattering the void. New changes were born in the chaos, but they were instantly destroyed by the storm. Then, they were created again and destroyed again. It was a non-stop cycle, and space could not be stabilized at all. Through the explosion of the demon power turbulence and the layers of void, Lin Feng seemed to be able to see the enchantress's star-like eyes. Silently, the two looked at each other. Although there was some regret in the enchantress's eyes, there was no shame or anger. Other than disappointment, there was more calmness. Keeping the gate of Star Sea, but exploding your true body. Does this mean that you're preparing more hope for the future, and now you're taking the initiative to retreat, indicating that you won't participate in this war between the two worlds? Seeing this, Lin Feng laughed softly. You've indeed surprised me, but things may not develop as you wish. Lin Feng let out a clear howl toward the sky. In the depths of his void-returned body, the true spirit divine vein flickered, forming a strange and huge force that caused the surrounding dark void to crack open. At this moment, all the stars in the universe seemed to be shaken by this strange and huge force. The orbit of the stars that had been flowing endlessly since ancient times changed at this moment. This power that caused the entire starry sky to shake, even the slightest change, was a shocking and boundless power. And this boundless power was affected by Lin Feng's magic power, and it was reflected back to him. The creation divine light on Lin Feng's body shone, and endless black and white splendor surged forth, spreading toward the surroundings like waves. The void above the entire jade capital mountain seemed to be completely enveloped in a sea of black and white light. Within this black and white sea, countless rays of light flickered incessantly, and the void was filled with brilliant characters and diagrams. They were branded into the void, and then gradually disappeared. But the shocking and grand aura of power became more and more intense. At this moment, in the endless dark void, there seemed to be faintly discernible ribbons of light. The ultimate truths of the great Tao seemed to be condensing into a physical form, shaking the heavens and the earth. Lin Feng stood in the void, and the creation divine light surged around his body. He used the heaven and earth reversal technique, and the majestic power forcefully blocked the violent airflow that seemed to engulf the enchantress's true body from exploding. This shocking scene fell into the eyes of the great sage and Zhu Yan, and it sent chills down their spines. Within Lin Feng's eyes, misty splendor flew out from his pupils. These splendor fell into the void and turned into one Tai Chi diagram after another. Black and white blended together, and yin and yang complemented each other. They spun rapidly in the dark void, shining brightly. In the center of each Tai Chi diagram, there seemed to be a figure sitting upright, both hands forming a seal. Many Tai Chi diagrams, many figures, and many spells stood side by side in the starry sky. Then, together, they struck their palms toward the galaxy of the universe, shouting in unison, "Go!" The trajectories of the billions of stars and galaxies all twisted, and the changes became greater and greater. The majestic power it contained also became more and more powerful, as if the entire boundless universe was shaking and had its own will. At this moment, it gradually opened its eyes and looked down on all living beings. Lin Feng stretched out his left palm, spreading his fingers and stretching them forward, as if he was pushing something away. His cosmos-reversing divine art erupted with power far beyond anything he'd ever unleashed in the past, forcibly blocking the spatial turbulence created by the heavenly enchantress. At the same time, Lin Feng pointed with his right finger, and tiny light spots flew out one after another. They were incomparably small, like grains of dust. A total of 49 grains of dust appeared between heaven and earth. With a loud rumble, they swallowed and spat out huge power. They expanded and turned into endless light, as if they were real worlds. It was Lin Feng's yin and yang dust divine ability. The 49 mustard seeds turned into Mount Sumeru, the yin and yang dust divine ability that used dust to carry heaven and earth expanded together at this moment. Together with the universe reversing divine ability, it locked down the demonic aura that was still crazily wreaking havoc in front of it like a tide beating against a dam. Then, Lin Feng raised his right hand high, and the ferocious sword will and sword chi once again turned into the terrifying heaven punishment sword formation. The index and middle fingers of his right hand stood side by side like a sword, and he slashed down at the raging waves. The raging waves of demon aura that were blocked by the heaven and earth reversal technique and the yin and yang dust technique, under the fierce attack of the Tao-destroying sword, also began to be gradually annihilated. The attack of the heaven punishment sword formation was like splitting the sky and the sea. It broke through the raging waves forcefully and slashed toward the demon soul of the enchantress, who was protected by the 12 sacred heavens flower formation. Behind the raging waves, the 12 sacred heavens flower formation was still working, but it was also affected by the self-destruction of the true body of the enchantress, and temporarily became depressed. In the formation, the dark clouds that had been blasted apart were still gathering at this moment, and there were faint shadows floating in the dark clouds. For the enchantress, in addition to losing her true body, the undying demon soul was also damaged by the self-destruction of the true body. At this moment, she was barely activating the 12 sacred heavens flower formation to transform into the time and space reversal technique to escape from this place, but Lin Feng had already broken through the thistles and thorns, and once again attacked in front of her. Lin Feng stared at the time and space reversal technique, and the light in his eyes suddenly changed, turning into the extreme cosmic light. His gaze was like the long river of time, and it fell on the time and space reversal technique. Being engulfed by the light, the time and space reversal technique immediately paused, and the terrifying attack of the heaven punishment sword formation had already cut on the demon formation. Immediately, the broken light flew all over the sky. The shadow in the dark clouds let out a soft sigh. Master of the celestial sect of wonders, good move. Did you always hold back in the past, or did your strength improve by leaps and bounds in such a short period of time? As the enchantress sighed, a strange door suddenly appeared in the dark clouds. The door opened, and light and shadow flashed inside the door, shining with starlight, as if it led to the melodious, desolate, ancient sea of stars. It was the Star Sea Gate that the enchantress controlled. Although Lin Feng controlled 3 Star Sea Gates, and the demon clan was destined to be unable to open the Star Tomb, it was still a great opportunity and capital for the demon clan to be able to enter the Star Sea to cultivate at any time. The enchantress destroyed her true form and kept the Star Sea Gate. On one hand, it was because she was talented, and on the other hand, the Star Sea Gate was really important for the demon clan's cultivation. Over the years, the enchantress had gathered a large number of demon clan experts, and her strength had been growing, and the Star Sea Gate had helped her a lot. Not long ago, she had witnessed the Golden Rock Sage take the initiative to drop the Star Sea Gate that he controlled, and thus seek to escape from Lin Feng. She did not expect that it would be her turn so soon. Thinking back to the time when Lin Feng's Dharma went to the Spirit Abyss Mountain, the original purpose was to attract her and the Golden Rock Sage to appear, and then seize their Star Sea Gate. But at this moment the enchantress could only sigh helplessly, and also took the initiative to drop her Star Sea Gate. Under the enchantress's control, a large amount of starlight gushed out of the huge gate, but it did not attack Lin Feng, but wrapped around the Star Sea Gate itself, and the gate gradually became illusory. A powerful force spread out, helping the time and space wheel magic array to shake off Lin Feng's celestial pole cosmic light, and then the time and space wheel magic array immediately operated to the extreme, turning into a pillar of light that connected to the sky, sweeping up the enchantress and disappearing into the void. Lin Feng's expression was calm, and he opened his right palm, and the illusory gate condensed back into a solid body, falling into his palm. This was the 4th Star Sea Gate that Lin Feng controlled. Chapter 1196. While Lin Feng and the enchantress were fighting, the demonic power of the divine Abyss Mountain below surged wildly. Although the Great Sage and Zhu Yan Great Saint were affected by the sky-severing sealed boundary, they still had powerful combat power as long as they didn't leave the divine Abyss Mountain. They naturally didn't want the enchantress to die at Lin Feng's hands. The death of the enchantress would not benefit them at all. The giant ape formed by the demonic power of the divine Abyss Mountain let out a deep roar that spread far away in the void. It was shocking. The giant ape's hands were even gradually lifting up Yujing Mountain. Seeing this, Lin Feng pointed lightly with his fingers. 49 yin and yang motes fell down. It was as if 49 mustard seed worlds were supporting Yujing Mountain at the same time. As he stabilized Yujing Mountain and the yin and yang life and death formation, Lin Feng looked up at the void. There, the wonderful wheel of time and space formation turned into a pillar of light that broke through the space-time and swept up the enchantress's demonic soul. At this moment it had already disappeared, and only the last trace could be seen. Lin Feng's eyes flickered slightly. If my previous guess is correct, she decided to give up the present, plot for the future, and withdraw from this war between the two realms. Is it because she has sensed something? No, it shouldn't be. Otherwise, she wouldn't have reacted like this. Maybe it's just an intuition. If that's the case, things are likely to be as I guessed before. Shaking his head, Lin Feng didn't continue to think about it. Instead, he put away the Star Sea Gate in his hand. After refining this Star Sea Gate, Lin Feng had almost gained control of more than half of the Star Sea. Although he couldn't control the power of the Star Sea, the resources in the Star Sea were almost at his and Xianmen Tianzong's disposal. Even the Gate of Star of the Heavenly Charm Great Sage has been seized. The number of Gates of Star that Lin Feng now has reached 4. There was a total of 6 Star Sea Gates. Obtaining one of them would allow one to enter and exit the desolate ancient Star Sea. But if one person controlled more Star Sea Gates, the meaning would be completely different. With 3 Starry Sea Gates gathered, they could forcefully close the other Starry Sea Gate. If all 4 Starry Sea Gates were gathered, they would be able to freely open the Star Graveyard and harvest star remains from within. Previously, Lin Feng had obtained 3 Star Sea Gates from the White Tiger Sage, the Omnipotent Sage, and the Golden Rock Sage. Apart from being able to close other people's gates, it also meant that no one else could open the Star Tomb without him. And right now Lin Feng himself controls 4 Star Sea Gates, which means that he can open the Star Tomb at will. Even though after the last time the Star Tomb needed a longer time to nurture large amounts of star remains, but for Lin Feng, the initiative was already completely in his hands. On the Spirit Abyss Mountain, the Omnipotent Sage and Zhu Yen Great Sage stared at the Star Sea Gate in Lin Feng's hand, their eyes full of envy. The Great Sage's eyes were full of resentment. In the desolate ancient Star Sea, it was Lin Feng who took the Star Sea Gate that belonged to the primordial demon Ape Clan. Lin Feng had cut off the primordial demon Ape Clan's access to the desolate ancient Star Sea. The impact was huge. The Great Sage's prestige in the primordial demon Ape Clan was seriously damaged. If he had not been strong enough and had a strong foundation, his position as clan leader might have been shaken. In the past few years, the Great Sage had been looking for the Enchantress and Golden Rock Saint. He wanted the Star Sea Gate in their hands. But because the Enchantress and Golden Rock Saint had been in seclusion most of the time before the war between the two realms, he had not found anything. The Enchantress's Star Sea Gate was right in front of him, but he could only look at it. He could not get it. What made him even more depressed was that the new owner of the Star Sea Gate was Lin Feng. And it just so happened that he was currently trapped by the sky-severing sealed realm. Even if he wanted to throw caution to the wind and have a great battle with Lin Feng, he also did not have the strength to do so. Possessing the Spirit Abyss Mountain ancestral land, he could only protect himself. As if sensing the Great Sage's anger, Lin Feng looked down at the Spirit Abyss Mountain and shook his head with a smile. The Enchantress's self-destruction of his true form caused an extremely violent turbulence. But because it was instantaneous, it lasted for a short period of time. Although the demonic power and spiritual qi were still chaotic, it was not as violent as before. The Spirit Abyss Mountain, under the influence of the black light, gradually began to distort time and space, merging back into the vast thousand domains of Infinite Mainland. At this moment, the affected areas of Infinite Mainland were still chaotic and barren. There were broken rifts everywhere, as if a corner of the entire vast thousand domains had been torn apart. But with the return of the Spirit Abyss Mountain, all the chaos began to be controlled again. The densely packed rifts began to heal at an accelerated rate, gradually restoring the original scene of the bright sky road. But it was only the world that had been stabilized. The destroyed creatures and the broken mountains could not be restored. There was only a scene of desolation. Lin Feng looked at the gradually falling spirit abyss mountain and chuckled. He landed on Yujing Mountain again. The yin and yang life and death array, together with Ding of Shenzhou, turned into a small light spot and returned to Lin Feng's glabella. The branches and leaves of the mysterious sky treasure tree on the towering immortal mountain swayed and trembled. It broke through the void and the huge white jade immortal mountain gradually disappeared. The omnipotent sage and the great saint of Zhuyan defended the spirit abyss mountain to the death and did not come out. If Lin Feng wanted to forcefully attack, not to mention whether or not he could break through, the time would not be short. And now the overall situation of the war between the two worlds was changing rapidly. He could not continue to tangle with these two great ape demons here. And under the effect of the heaven interception boundary, the two of them could not think of continuing to cause trouble while Lin Feng was away for a short period of time. The Great Sage and Zhu Yan Great Sage watched the figure of Lin Feng leaving with Yujing Mountain. They were expressionless and livid, but there was nothing they could do. If they left the protection of the Spirit Abyss Mountain, their demon souls and true bodies would immediately be separated, and their strength would be greatly reduced. They could only wait patiently. Let's see how long this heaven interception boundary of yours can trap me. The Great Sage clenched his teeth, and sharp and huge fangs emerged from his mouth. He was like an active volcano that could erupt at any time. Zhu Yan Great Sage, who was beside him, was also depressed and filled with anger. He had thought that the return of Yudu would definitely force Lin Feng to return, and he would be able to leave Spirit Abyss Mountain without any scruples to find trouble with Mount Shu. Who knew that he would still be trapped in Spirit Abyss Mountain and unable to go out? Leaving behind the two depressed great demons of the ape race, Lin Feng drove Yujing Mountain and moved through the void, returning to the world of the human race in the divine land. His expression was calm. In front of him floated 4 huge gates in the void, and faint starlight flickered above the gates. At the beginning of the war between the two worlds, Lin Feng's initial strategic goal was to find a way to take the Gate of the Sea of Stars from the hands of the Golden Rock Great Sage and the Enchantress. Until today, this initial goal had been achieved. But until now, strange changes had occurred one after another, making it difficult for Lin Feng to relax. If one were to say that the birth of the future star constellation Glazed Buddha Lord wasn't something to be concerned about at the moment, the sudden changes in the Great Void Temple in the Mysterious Sea and the Yudu clan's return to the world of the living were undoubtedly urgent matters at hand. On the way back to the Divine Land, bad news came one after another. First, after the Yudu race reappeared in the vast land of Infinite Wasteland, they immediately went to the base of the Taishu Temple in this world of the demon race, Taihua Mountain. After careful consideration, the elder of the Taishu Temple, Venerable Xian Yi, who was stationed at Taihua Mountain, finally chose to give up on Taihua Mountain. All the cultivators of the Taishu Temple returned to White Cloud Mountain. The difference in defense power between these two places was huge. Although it was a pity to give up Taihua Mountain, Venerable Xian Yi still made a quick decision. White Cloud Mountain and Taihua Mountain were directly connected by a realm passage. Under the leadership of Venerable Xian Yi, the Taishu Temple used their last resort to forcibly annihilate this small realm passage. Since the war between the two worlds, the blessed land of Taihua Mountain, which had been occupied by the Taishu Temple, was completely destroyed. But whether it was Lin Feng or the others, no one had any objections to this. Although Venerable Xian Yi's choice seemed weak and made him lose his prestige, it was actually the most rational decision at the moment. It was a good idea to defend against the enemy outside the country's gates, but they had to have enough power to support it. With most of the strong practitioners of the Taishu Temple and the Haotian mirror entering the mysterious sea and unable to come out, the Taishu temple had no choice but to avoid the sharp edge of the Yudu clan. At the same time, the Taishu temple also sent valuable information. Other than the new clan master of the Yudu clan, 12 fantasy sons, there were at least 2 great Yudu demons in the last days realm accompanying them. With such a formation, even if Venerable Xian Yi defended White Cloud Mountain, he would still be under heavy pressure, let alone facing the enemy at Taihua Mountain. After the Taishu temple took the initiative to give up Taihua Mountain and retreat to the Divine Land, the strong practitioners of the Yudu clan also went straight for the Divine Land. Along the way, other than the humans who happened to be in their way being easily killed, the Yudu clan didn't care about the other human cultivators who were fighting and couldn't dodge in time. After entering the Divine Land, their target was where the mountain gate of the Taishu temple was, White Cloud Mountain. The Yudu clan had returned, and the Taishu temple had lost Taihua Mountain. However, from the looks of it, there weren't too many casualties. The other piece of news was truly a nightmare. Kuan Dragon King and Jade Sky Dragon King led a group of strong practitioners of the dragon race out of the mysterious sea and blocked the great Qin dynasty in Heaven Wasteland. Even though Zhu Yi and Sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper of Mount Shu came to their aid, Qin Emperor Stonefeather still died on the spot. Even the immortal Dragon City was lost in the void. The great Qin dynasty's retreat from the war between the two worlds was already a foregone conclusion. However, in comparison, there were still some exchanges. Zhu Yi and Sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper withstood the pressure from Kuan Dragon King and killed Jade Sky Dragon King. Their names shook heaven origin, and this made Lin Feng feel happy for his disciple. The opposition between the known and the unknown. Xiaoyi has indeed walked out of his path of 2 rights. Lin Feng sat on Jade Capital Mountain with his eyes closed. The scripture of heavenly Tao virtue circulated as though it was one with the great Tao of heaven. He felt the feedback from the Tao. It's different from my path of 2 rights, and it's also different from little Lin's path of defying fate and fate. However, it's equally exciting. Good. Very good. While Lin Feng was pleased, the sudden change in the great Qin dynasty made him frown. Not mentioning the death of Stonefeather, even the immortal Dragon City is lost. In this case, the situation in the Divine Land will probably change. Chapter 1197. In the past, Zhu Yi had established his Tao with the principles of light and darkness. As he continued to cultivate and understand the Tao of heaven and earth, new changes occurred. Light turned into light, darkness turned into obscurity, and darkness changed to deduce the principles of heaven and earth. Light referred to things that were clear, visible, and could be understood. Obscurity referred to things that were obscure, invisible, incomprehensible, and unperceivable. The combination of the two was actually the opposition and unity between the known and the unknown, the visible and the invisible. Even with the development of the cultivation world, there were still countless things that were unknown. There was no end to learning. In the process of continuous exploration and learning, people would turn the unknown into the known. They would use various methods to sense the things and principles that they could not understand in the past, and grasp the things and principles that they could not grasp in the past. This was the process of the Tao of Tao constantly advancing. The unknown was understood as the known, and the known extended to even more unknowns. The two were endless and contained everything that was known and unknown. This Tao of Yin and Yang was the path and direction of Zhu Yi's cultivation in the future. At this moment, he had successfully cleared the fog in front of him and officially stepped onto this path. He had successfully taken his first step. If he continued to move forward with his head held high, his future would be limitless. Compared to Zhu Yi's achievement of killing the Blue Sky Dragon King under the pressure of the Kuan Dragon King and the mysterious sea receiving ritual, Lin Feng was more happy and comforted about his understanding of the Tao. However, while comforting his disciple, Lin Feng also sighed about the great Qin dynasty's misfortune. In a sense, the death of Emperor Qin Stonefeather and the loss of the immortal Dragon City were very unnecessary. It was a result that was completely unexpected and made people feel helpless at the same time. Shi Xingyun was actually the reincarnation of the remnant soul of the primordial heavenly dragon gene. This was also out of Lin Feng's expectations. Stonefeather sacrificed it to the immortal Dragon City, but a huge accident happened because Shi Xingyun had yet to form an essence soul. This was something that no one, including Stonefeather himself, had expected. Zhu Yi had comprehended his Tao of Yin and Yang and a new mystique under the pressure of the Kuan Dragon King and the other dragon race experts. There was no room for tricks. If Sword Sovereign Astral Dipper had arrived a moment earlier, the Qin Emperor Stonefeather would not have been forced to carry out the dragon soul sacrifice in advance, resulting in the subsequent accidents. But in reality, Sword Venerable Tiangong's participation in the battle was outside of everyone's plans. No matter who it was, no one could blame Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper. Otherwise, it would be an unreasonable act of anger. However, for the cultivators of the Great Qin dynasty, who were under heavy pressure, some of the younger generation might not be able to think so calmly. Even Zhu Yi's breakthrough in the midst of battle and his efforts to turn the tide might be perceived by some as him deliberately holding back his strength and harboring unfathomable motives. When one was under great pressure, venting one's anger on others was often the simplest way to relieve the pressure. Although it was completely useless in reality and would even bring more trouble, there would always be people who would never get tired of it. This was human nature. Lin Feng did not care too much. He also felt pity for the Great Qin dynasty's misfortune. In recent years, Lin Feng could vaguely sense that while the relationship between the Great Qin dynasty and his Xianmen Tianzong was still very friendly, the higher-ups of the Great Qin dynasty, led by the Qin Emperor Stonefeather, probably had very complicated feelings. On one hand, the relationship between the two had always been friendly and close. On the other hand, Xianmen Tianzong's strength, influence were all growing at a shocking and unbelievable speed. To the Great Qin dynasty, how to position their relationship with Xianmen Tianzong had become an increasingly important problem. At the same time, it also gave them a headache. When it came to the position of the Qin Emperor Stonefeather and the Great Qin dynasty, Lin Feng would be the first to not believe that they were willing to be under someone else. If the Qin Emperor Stonefeather was willing to be under someone else, it would have been impossible for him to form an alliance with Xianmen Tianzong, the Purple Sky Path, the Northern Militant Royal Court, and even the Great Zhou dynasty, who had always been at odds with him, to resist the arrangements that Taishu Temple had made for the human world of the Divine Land. The Zhou Emperor Liang Pan was also a similar person, which was why there was such a thing back then. However, with the Battle of Yingxi and the Battle of Xian extermination, the situation of the Divine Land had been constantly changing, causing the Great Zhou dynasty's position to gradually shift. Perhaps their external styles were different, but in essence, whether it was the Qin Emperor Stonefeather or the Zhou Emperor Liang Pan, they were the same person. Back then, the Qin Emperor Stonefeather had resolutely joined the alliance to resist the arrangements of Taishu Temple. As Xianmen Tianzong continued to grow stronger, his opinion of Xianmen Tianzong became more and more complicated. This was something to be expected. Improving the Great Qin dynasty's strength had always been the goal of the Qin Emperor Stonefeather and the experts of the Great Qin dynasty. Opportunities had to be fought for by themselves, and at the same time, opportunities were often accompanied by danger. This required the decision-makers to devise strategies themselves. The war between the two worlds undoubtedly contained great danger and opportunity. In the previous war, when the Taishu Temple had entered the Xianhai Sea and Lin Feng had been in the Spirit Abyss Mountain, the Great Qin dynasty had been unstoppable in the infinite wilderness continent. Everything seemed to be developing in a good direction, but in the next moment, the situation suddenly took a turn for the worse. Lin Feng could roughly guess the thoughts of the Qin Emperor Stonefeather and the others. This was considered human nature. However, in his opinion, the great Qin dynasty and the Qin Emperor Stonefeather were slightly impatient in the war between the two worlds. Although they were not as bold as the Golden Rock Sage, they were still not as calm as Stonefeather had previously appeared. The cruelty of the war between the two worlds was on full display at this moment. One wrong step could lead to a bottomless abyss. The great Qin dynasty now had 1 foot over the edge of the cliff. The Qin Emperor Stonefeather had died, the immortal dragon city had been lost, the Dao integration realm expert Shi Zhongmao had been seriously injured, and the other top experts of the great Qin dynasty, such as the Anliang monarch Shi Zhongyue and the Jingfang monarch Shi Lin, had also died in battle. The power of the great Qin dynasty had been reduced by more than half compared to before the war. The only top expert left was the Nanming King Shi Zongtang, who had stayed behind to guard West Hill City. The Qin Emperor Stonefeather had died, and his son, the crown prince of the great Qin dynasty, Shi Chongyun, was only at the later stages of the Yuanying realm. He had yet to form his primordial spirit. If it was during normal times, he might still be able to do something, but now that the war between the two worlds was happening, it was destined that he would not be able to take on such a big responsibility. It was hard to predict what the great Qin dynasty would do next. Although Zhu Yi and Sword Venerable Tiangang guarded the realm passage in the southern wasteland together and blocked Shen Dragon King, who had replaced Kuan Dragon King, the crisis of the great Qin dynasty was not completely resolved. The main target of the Yuta race's descent into the Divine Land was the White Cloud Mountain, but the other powers of the human race could not be careless either. Under such circumstances, what would the great Zhou dynasty do next would be something that people would be very concerned about. Launching an attack on the great Qin dynasty during the war between the two worlds to take advantage of the situation was something that the great Zhou dynasty might not do. However, if they really had such thoughts, there were other, gentler methods that they could think of. That was the qi of the dragon vein of all living beings in the Divine Land. During the war between the two worlds 4,000 years ago, the great Zhou dynasty had yet to rise up and was just a small country at the border of the great Qin dynasty. At that time, the great Qin dynasty controlled most of the secular territory of the Divine Land and gathered the qi of the dragon vein of the entire Divine Land in West Hill City. They displayed great power during the war. After the war between the two worlds, the great Qin dynasty fell into a low, while the great Zhou dynasty gradually rose up. When it reached the generation of the Zhou Emperor Liang Pan, the momentum of the great Zhou dynasty's rise was completely unleashed. They became a powerful dynasty that was on equal footing with the great Qin dynasty. There was a period of time when their national power was even above the great Qin dynasty. During this process, the Tianjing city and the great Zhou dynasty forcefully split the qi of the dragon vein that was originally flowing towards West Hill City and the great Qin dynasty. In the recent years, as the west wind suppressed the east wind again, the great Zhou dynasty retreated and the great Qin dynasty regained the upper hand. The great Qin dynasty had always been trying to take back the qi of the dragon vein that ruled over all living beings in the divine continent. Now, the great Qin dynasty naturally could not continue with its previous plans. However, as the west wind declined and the east wind rose again, it was likely that the great Zhou dynasty would be thinking about the great Qin dynasty. The great Qin dynasty had lost both the Qin Emperor Shi Yu and the immortal dragon city. Even though they could choose a new emperor to inherit the qi of the dragon vein, it would still take time for them to completely control the qi of the dragon vein. Moreover, from a completely neutral point of view, after losing the immortal dragon city, the person with the highest cultivation in the great Qin dynasty was Nanming King Shi Zongtang, who was at the same Dao integration realm as the Qin Emperor Shi Yu. However, the effect of his control over the qi of the dragon vein was evidently inferior to that of the Zhou Emperor Liang Pan, who had the Grand Imperial Palace. This was under the situation where the Zhou Emperor Liang Pan and the Grand Imperial Palace alone held the qi of the dragon vein. If the qi of the dragon vein was gathered together, the power would naturally be even greater. Today, when Yudu descended on the Divine Land, the entire Divine Land was facing a massive crisis. However, danger and opportunity always existed together. To the Zhou Emperor Liang Pan, while facing danger, there was undoubtedly a massive opportunity. The environment of the war between the two worlds would restrict the internal conflicts between the strong powers of the human race, but it could also become the most suitable excuse. They would say that it was an emergency and they were borrowing it temporarily, but the result was that they would never return it. The only good news for the current Great Qin dynasty was that even though they had participated in the war between the two worlds, they didn't have a huge grudge with the Yudu race. More accurately speaking, the Great Qin dynasty had suffered heavy losses under the hands of the Dragon race and Yudu race, which led to their decline. In recent years, before the war between the two worlds, they gradually showed signs of revival. Speaking of grudges, it should be the Great Qin dynasty that hated the Yudu race. However, at this moment, they definitely wouldn't provoke the Yudu race. On the contrary, even though the Great Qin dynasty was in an abnormally weak state, the Yudu race's main target was still White Cloud Mountain. Lin Feng sat on Jade Capital Mountain. As he flew through the air, he kept thinking about the current situation. Chapter 1198. At the moment, the atmosphere in the Great Qin dynasty's capital, West Hill City, was rather peaceful. The news of Emperor Qin Shi Yu's death and the Great Qin dynasty's expedition to Infinite Wasteland was tightly sealed. However, in West Hill City, within the palace, there was a gloomy atmosphere. There was a deathly silence, and the atmosphere was extremely oppressive. Although the Great Qin dynasty displayed extremely strong control at this moment, preventing the internal situation from falling into chaos, there was still a sense of panic within the palace. In the main hall of the palace, there were a few people sitting face to face. Beside them were some magic power projections. They were the magic power projections of the Great Qin dynasty's top experts who had important tasks and could not attend personally. They had come to participate in this important meeting for the Great Qin dynasty. Whether it was the real person or the magic power projection, everyone's gaze would always sweep across the empty dragon throne in the main hall and sigh to themselves. A primordial soul transformation realm elder of the royal family stroked his beard and said softly, "Let's act according to His Majesty's will." Before he left, although Emperor Qin Shi Yu had died, he had personally led the army in the war between the two worlds. Even with the immortal Dragon City, Shi Yu might not be able to guarantee his safety. Although it was inauspicious, everyone in the Great Qin dynasty, including Shi Yu himself, had to make all sorts of contingency plans out of responsibility. This naturally included all sorts of plans for the worst. For example, if Emperor Qin Shi Yu died, or if the immortal Dragon City was damaged or even destroyed. Of course, there was also the worst possibility, if both Emperor Qin Shi Yu and the immortal Dragon City were lost. This also involved whether the external situation would ease or become tense after Emperor Qin Shi Yu died, and whether the overall situation of the war between the two worlds was critical for the Great Qin dynasty. The current situation was undoubtedly the worst outcome. Under such circumstances, the person who could shoulder the heavy burden of the Great Qin dynasty was undoubtedly not the supervising Crown Prince Shi Chongyun, who was only at the later stage of yuanying. Of the Great Qin dynasty's 3 Dao integration experts, Emperor Qin Shi Yu had died, and Monarch Ruyang Shi Zongmao was seriously injured. Now, the strongest person was Nanming Monarch Shi Zongtong, who had been guarding West Hill City. With Shun Dragon King being blocked by Zhu Yi and Sword Venerable Tiangang, and with the Yudu race not descending on the Divine Land, Great Qin's situation was not too dangerous. In such a situation, perhaps some people would suggest that Shi Zongtong temporarily act as regent to support Great Qin. But now that Udarace had descended, even though their main target was Taishu Temple, the other powers, including Great Qin Dynasty, had no choice but to raise their guard and prepare for battle. In order to gather the dragon Vane Qi, Shi Chongyun had to ascend to the throne. The current situation did not allow Shi Chongyun to ascend to the throne, and in order to gather all of the Great Qin Dynasty's power and defend against external enemies, the only choice was the South Bright Monarch, Shi Zongtong. In the posthumous edict left by the Great Qin Emperor, Stonefeather, it was also clearly stated that under special circumstances, the Southern Bright Monarch, Shi Zongtong, would automatically be promoted to Imperial Uncle and become the first successor of the Great Qin. There was no need to exploit any loopholes in language. At this moment, no one would deny that the current situation was undoubtedly the special situation that Stonefeather had spoken of. Perhaps the only person who was disappointed was Shi Chongyun. However, as the only cultivator below the primordial spirit realm, he remained expressionless and silent. The Southern Bright Monarch, Shi Zongtong, sat at the head of the crowd. He did not look at the dragon throne on the stairs, and he was also silent, as if he was thinking about something. Opposite him was a magic power projection from the Great Qin Dynasty's other Dao integration realm expert, the Rogan Sun Monarch, Shi Zongmao. However, Shi Zongmao's current state was very poor. Even though it was just a magic power projection, people could see that he was very weak. This was a very rare thing for the Rogan Sun Monarch, who had always been tough. Shi Zongmao coughed dryly and said slowly, "For now, the Great Qin Dynasty can only withdraw its defenses and not start a war with anyone. Let's get through the war between the two worlds first." A Great Qin elder beside him sighed and said, "His Majesty and the immortal Dragon City have fallen together, and the Great Qin Dynasty has fallen into its weakest moment in thousands of years. The accumulation from the last war between the two worlds is almost all used up. Even if we get through this war, the situation will change. Where should the Great Qin Dynasty go?" After a slight hesitation, the elder said softly, "Could it be that the only way is to really side with Xianmen Tianzong?" The Great Qin Dynasty's higher-ups and experts present fell silent. The Great Qin Dynasty had been having a headache in recent years about how to get along with the ally that was growing stronger and stronger, to the point that they were gradually unable to catch up to. Now, this problem seemed to have been easily solved. However, this method of solving it made Great Qin feel quite unhappy. However, at this moment, it seemed that they had no other choice. If we don't side with Xianmen Tianzong, are we supposed to side with the Great Zhou Dynasty? A middle-aged man opposite to the elder curled his lips and said, "Although we are indeed unwilling, Xianmen Tianzong has not interfered with our internal affairs for now, nor does he have any intention of controlling us. The Northern Militant Royal Court is the same as the Great Qin Dynasty. They are both factions that are very involved in the world, but Xianmen Tianzong has no intention of controlling them." The middle-aged man snorted and said, "Right now, the enemy we should be most wary of is the Great Zhou Dynasty. Although there is a war between the two worlds right now, who knows if Emperor Liang Pan of Zhou will take the risk out of desperation. After all, for the Great Zhou Dynasty, this is the best time to swallow up the Great Qin Dynasty." Everyone present nodded. The Great Zhou Dynasty had always been the enemy they were most wary of. Even if they had been lying low in recent years, Emperor Liang Pan's ambition could not be underestimated. At this moment, an elder suddenly looked at Monarch Gungyang, Shi Zongmao, and asked, "Monarch Gungyang, you said before that there seemed to be a lot of doubts about His Majesty's battle." Shi Zongmao's expression was solemn. This old man only heard a simple description from Sword Venerable Big Dipper. His Majesty's death and the loss of immortal Dragon City were mainly due to an accident during the Dragon's soul sacrifice, causing the situation to slide into an uncontrollable abyss. Sword Venerable Big Dipper arrived a bit late, causing His Majesty to have to take the risk. However, this cannot be blamed on Sword Venerable Big Dipper. It is just that Zhu Yi of Xianmen Tianzong's strength has clearly changed before and after the battle. Before and after His Majesty's death, this Xianmen Tianzong elder Zhu's strength was not the same, but he did not refine his spirit to return to the void and break through to the next realm. Shi Zongmao took a deep breath. Although divine abilities and magic power cannot be excluded, and there is a possibility of a breakthrough in the aspect of magic power, the difference between before and after is worth paying attention to. All the cultivators of Great Qin fell silent. At this moment, Shi Zongtong, who was sitting on the seat of honor, clapped his hands lightly, and everyone looked at him. Shi Zongtong said silently, "Whether there is something fishy or not, our most reliable ally is still Xianmen Tianzong. The Yudu race has descended on the Divine Land, and the main force of Taishu Temple and the Haotian Mirror are trapped in the Xianhai, unable to return. It can even be said that everyone in the Divine Land, including Dao Venerable Xian Yi of White Cloud Mountain, is counting on the master of Xianmen's true body to return from Tianhuang vast land. Only then will the human cultivation world have enough confidence to fight Yudu." An accident happened to Taishu Temple in the Xianhai, and their mountain gate has become the most likely target of the Yudu race's attack. After this war between the two worlds, Taishu Temple is likely to be heavily damaged. Although it is hard to predict whether Xianmen Tianzong will be a blessing or a curse, from the looks of it, their future is obviously better than Taishu Temple's. The Great Zhou Empire has been getting closer and closer to Taishu Temple, so Xianmen Tianzong is ultimately our most reliable choice. Everyone present, including King Rajanyang Shi Zongmao, nodded in unison. One of them suddenly turned to look at Shi Zongtong and Shi Zongmao, wanting to say something but hesitating. Shi Zongtong, however, seemed to know what he was thinking. Silently, he said, "Even so, we are not suitable to welcome Shi Tianhao as the emperor." That person saw that Shi Zongtong had already made it clear, so he simply said, "Since we have already decided to side with Xianmen Tianzong, why don't we be more thorough and place a bigger bet? If the Great Qin Emperor can't rise in the divine prefecture and become a supreme existence, and if Xianmen Tianzong can really sweep through the world in the future, we will strive to become the strongest power under their rule. Celestial Venerable Huang is one of the 4 heroes under the master of Xianmen. If he becomes Celestial Emperor Huang of the Great Qin dynasty, our Great Qin dynasty will work hard to occupy the strongest corner of the territory under Xianmen Tianzong in the future." That person's voice was slightly solemn. Otherwise, even if we completely side with Xianmen Tianzong, our future development will still be unpredictable. Putting aside the fact that the northern militant imperial court has been advancing by leaps and bounds, Celestial Venerable Huang's big brother Xiao Yan's wife is a descendant of the ancient emperor's bloodline. Although it was not widely spread, and the ancient immortals world was sufficiently secretive, the news of Lin Feng bringing Xiao Yan to the ancient immortals world to propose marriage still leaked out. The Great Qin dynasty was naturally the first to pay attention to this matter. Shi Zongtong shook his head. Putting aside the fact that Shi Tianhao will definitely not accept the matter of succession, even if we can accept a branch bloodline as emperor, and can accept a direct disciple of Xianmen Tianzong as emperor, Shi Tianhao's sense of belonging to Xianmen Tianzong is far stronger than to the Shi family, let alone our Great Qin dynasty. Although it is a bit hard to say, he actually has no feelings or sense of belonging to our Great Qin. In the entire country, the person he is closest to in the royal family is Xing Yun. Hearing this, the higher-ups of the Great Qin dynasty revealed a regretful expression and did not mention the previous suggestion. At the side, Shi Zongmao said in a low voice, "Let's try our best to survive the calamity of the war between the two worlds first. We need some time for the people to accept the news of the former emperor's death, appoint a new emperor, and gather the dragon vein energy again. All of these must be done as soon as possible." He looked at Shi Zongtong. In this special period, the coronation ceremony can only be simple. To avoid chaos, we can't invite other people to attend the ceremony. Of course. Shi Zongtang nodded, stood up, and walked to the center of the hall. Looking at the high dragon throne, he slowly said, "Inform Xianmen Tianzong and the other powers that are on good terms with the great Qin dynasty. We should also start preparing." In the hall, Rosen monarch Shi Zongmao's projection was the first to stand up. After a moment of silence, he slowly bowed to Shi Zongtang. Chapter 1199. As Shi Zongmao, who was also at the Tao integration realm like Shi Zongtang, bowed, the other higher-ups of Great Qin also stood up and did the same. Shi Chongyun did not say anything. In the end, he also stood up and bowed to Shi Zongtang. That day, the Great Qin Empire announced to its people that Shi Yu had passed away and that a new emperor had succeeded the throne. Even though the Great Qin Empire's dragon Vane Qi was still gathered in Xiling City, it could not help but fall into chaos. Red, yellow, green, white, and black dragons of light rose up from the Great Qin Empire's territories and passed through the void, gathering towards the Great Qin Empire's capital, Xiling City. These dragons of light seemed to be formless, and even many cultivators could not see their bodies. However, they could faintly feel the restlessness within them. Within this restlessness there was also a deep majesty, as if it was the will of the heavens that was worshipped by all beings. The Great Qin Empire's subjects had already been recruited when the war between the two worlds had just begun. Now that these subjects had heard of the Qin Emperor's death, they could not help but fall into panic. Even though a new emperor had succeeded the throne, it would still take time to calm the people's hearts. The Great Qin Empire naturally wanted to keep the news under wraps, and it had the ability to do so. However, in order to receive the dragon Vane Qi, it could only announce the news. Everyone knew that a new war between the two worlds had arrived. Before the war had ended, news of the previous emperor's death had spread. The Great Qin Empire's subjects naturally had many speculations, and their hearts became more and more unsettled. Before the Great Qin Empire faced a new round of external crisis, it first had to deal with the internal turmoil. Fortunately, this was something that the Great Qin Empire had planned for in the worst-case scenario, so it was carried out in an orderly manner. However, the current external situation attracted the Great Qin Empire's attention. The Great Qin Empire was truly in a precarious situation, and the consequences were unimaginable. After discussing with Shi Zongmao and the others, the new Emperor Shi Zongtang finally made an important decision to invite the cultivators of Xianmen Tianzong to Xiling City. After the battle with Great Sage Zhu Jian, Wang Lin had successfully killed Great Sage Zhu Jian, but he had also been heavily injured. Zhu Yi's sword sovereign Big Dipper guarded the southern wasteland realm passageway and confronted the dragon race's Shen Dragon King, while Xiao Yan guarded the northern foothills of Xianmen Tianzong. However, there was also good news. Shi Tianhao and the rest who had stayed in Infinite Wasteland finally returned to the Divine Prefecture. Under Zhu Yi's guidance, they returned through the southern wasteland domain passage. Other than his junior sister Luo Qingwu, there was also Xianmen Tianzong's guest elder Dao Venerable Blazing Sun, Zhuge Zhuge, and Great Demon Great Sage Lu Yuan, who was in the realm of star and soul as one. What made the Great Qin Empire at ease was that Shi Tianhao and Luo Qingwu were the personal disciples of Lin Feng. After they arrived at Xiling City, anyone who wanted to invade Xiling City would have to consider the attitude of Xian Gate's master Lin Feng. However, while Shi Tianhao, Luo Qingwu, and the others were still on the way, something even more influential attracted the attention of the Great Qin Empire and all the human powers in the Divine Land. They had to pay attention to it. The Yudu race had descended on White Cloud Mountain. The Divine Mountain that used to be shrouded in white clouds was now silent. In the void above the mountain peak, a large amount of light flashed in the space. Boundless purple light spread out and dyed the surrounding boundless worlds purple. Boundless runes were inscribed in the void, causing the entire world to distort. The fog around White Cloud Mountain dispersed under the shine of the purple light, and a gentle white light shone. It was as though rings of light were rippling in heaven and earth. They shrouded White Cloud Mountain and resonated with the purple light. A handsome youth that looked to be in his 20s appeared on the peak of White Cloud Mountain. He looked at the crack in the void above his head calmly. Beside him stood the current monastery master of Taishu Temple, Yen Nanlai. Behind them were the 3 grand elders of Taishu Temple. Other than Dao Venerable Qing Ning and Fu Yunkong, there was another person who looked like a child but had incomparably aged eyes. He was the radical elder of Taishu Temple, Kuang Heng. Beside Kuang Heng, Dao Venerable Qing Ning and Fu Yunkong stood a youth in green. He was Yen Nanlai's disciple, Lin Daohan. The cultivators of Taishu Temple all raised their heads to look at the huge crack in the void. In the crack, figures that resembled humans but had triangles on their heads and sharp fangs that resembled dragons and wolves stepped out one after another. These powerful beings all had long silvery white fur on their backs. A huge tail trailed behind them, and the surface of their skin was covered in purple runes. They were the former ruler of Heaven Wasteland, the Yudu race. The strongest Yudu beast in the lead stood upright like a human. It had a medium build and a calm gaze. Silently, it looked down at White Cloud Mountain. It was the current clan master of the Yudu race, the 12 phantom sons of Yudu. He didn't purposely restrain his power, nor did he purposely reveal his presence. He just stood there calmly, as though he was the center of heaven and earth. However, at this moment, there seemed to be an invisible pressure pressing down on White Cloud Mountain, causing the rippling rings of light around it to distort. Dao Venerable Xian Yi and Yen Nanlai frowned slightly, their gazes grave. Yen Nanlai looked at Dao Venerable Xian Yi. Senior Uncle Xian Yi, this Yudu seems to have experienced more than one calamity. Slowly, Dao Venerable Xian Yi nodded his head. Indeed, more than one. Now that I think about it, during the Battle of the Spirit Sea, this Yudu was probably experiencing a calamity and was in its weakest state. Or perhaps there were other reasons why it didn't make a move. Yen Nanlai looked at the strong practitioners of the Yudu race walking out from the crack behind Phantom Sun Yu. His expression was grave. In the previous battle, after Yudu of the Heavenly Sea fell, the Yudu race went into hiding. Even though many Yudu beasts were killed, their foundation back then was simply too strong. After cultivating for so long, they still have many strong practitioners. Phantom Sun Yudu looked down at White Cloud Mountain calmly. Behind him, there were 2 tall Yudu beasts that stood upright like humans. Silently, they were also examining the mountain gate of their number 1 enemy back then. Behind them were 3 tall Yudu beasts. Their gazes were fixed on White Cloud Mountain below them. Their gazes were filled with eagerness, overbearing and full of aggression. Behind these 3 Yudu beasts were the other Yudu beasts. They stood together and surveyed the surroundings, scanning the heaven and earth of the divine land. Dao Venerable Xian Yi Yen Nanlai and the rest looked at these strong practitioners of Yudu, and their gazes narrowed. Words were already meaningless. Both sides could only fight. Dao Venerable Xian Yi said solemnly, "Formation." Other than Yen Nanlai, Kuang Heng, the young Dao Venerable, Fu Yunkong, and Lin Daohan all disappeared from the peak of White Cloud Mountain. At the same time, 8 rays of light rushed into the sky. These 8 rays of light combined with the magic power of Kuang Heng, Lin Daohan, and instantly formed a huge formation in the sky above White Cloud Mountain. In the formation, black and white clouds swirled and intertwined continuously, giving birth to endless changes. On top of the black and white whirlpool, there were rays of golden light flashing. The golden light wasn't dazzling, but it gave people a feeling of infinite majesty. It seemed incomparably ethereal, difficult to touch and difficult to reach. At this moment, a pair of eyes seemed to appear in the sky above White Cloud Mountain. 1 black and 1 white, 1 yin and 1 yang. It was simple, but it displayed the essence of the great Tao of heaven and earth. However, there seemed to be no emotion in this pair of eyes. It was like the supreme heavenly Tao, sitting and watching the vicissitudes of life. It wasn't heartless, but it treated everyone equally. This gaze seemed to be everywhere, passing through time and space. Everything in the world was contained in this gaze, and it couldn't be blocked or avoided. The figures of two elders appeared beside Tao Venerable Xian Yi. One of them had a seemingly transparent ancient bell above his head, and the other had a huge drum above his head. They were the primordial spirits of the void Yin-Yang bell and the supreme formation breaking drum, Yin-Yang Wang and Tai Gu Immortal. Thank you, elders. As soon as Tao Venerable Xian Yi finished speaking, Yin-Yang Wang and Tai Gu Immortal nodded solemnly and disappeared. The void Yin-Yang bell and the supreme formation breaking drum immediately changed on the peak of White Cloud Mountain. The folded space was fully unfolded, and endless golden light kept flashing. Clouds surged rapidly, and an incomparably magnificent golden palace rose from the ground. It was so huge that it couldn't be any bigger. The chanting of countless deities and Buddhas could be heard coming from the palace, as if a holy kingdom had descended on the peak of White Cloud Mountain. This was the creation treasure, the Taishu Temple. Tao Venerable Xian Yi sat cross-legged on the peak of White Cloud Mountain, one hand forming a seal, the other pointing at the ground of the peak. Light flashed around him, and the entire White Cloud Immortal Mountain emitted a dazzling light at this moment. Gradually, White Cloud Mountain disappeared, and so did Tao Venerable Xian Yi. As the endless light flowed, the entire White Cloud Mountain seemed to have turned into a huge and illusory ball of light. Within the ball of light, 9 layers of illusions could be vaguely seen, and each layer was higher than the previous one. Pleasant celestial music lingered in the air, as if all the deities in the heavens were chanting the laws of the great Tao together. From the first layer of the light door, to the second layer of the starry sky, to the third layer of the spatial rift, all the way up, the fourth layer was a vast world that looked like a huge palm that covered all 4 directions. The fifth layer was a layer of clouds filled with golden lightning bolts. The sixth layer was a huge celestial city in the sky. The seventh layer was a colorful halo that looked like the fusion of 6 layers of worlds, and the 8th layer was a mysterious celestial realm filled with celestial music. It was to the extent that up to the 9th level, nothing tangible could be seen. There was a profound radiance that was not resplendent, not dazzling, not grand, not shocking, but indescribable, 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 and incomprehensible. It was the 9 heavens of the Great Void Palace. At this moment, the entire White Cloud Mountain seemed to have turned into the 9 heavens of the Great Void Palace. The creation treasure, Taishu Temple, suddenly opened up at this moment, turning into a mysterious celestial realm that was similar to the 8th layer of the 9 heavens of the Great Void Palace. It completely merged with the 8th layer of the 9 heavens of the Great Void Palace that was formed by the fusion of Tao Venerable Xian Yi and White Cloud Mountain. Yen Nanlai raised his left hand, and the Taishu seal on the back of his left hand shone with an indescribable light. It was the Taishu mystic light. The light enveloped Yen Nanlai's body and lifted him up, bringing him into the 9th layer of the 9 heavens of the Great Void Palace together with the endless mysterious light. Chapter 1200. Above the Divine Land, there was a large amount of light spreading out. The entire Great Qin world seemed to be covered in a hazy light fog. The attention of all the experts in the human world of cultivation was attracted to the direction of White Cloud Mountain. That was where the #1 holy land of the human race had been since the ancient era of the Divine Land, and its name had spread throughout the ages. No matter what their opinion of that place was, everyone acknowledged that it possessed great power that had been passed down to this day. Now that White Cloud Mountain had unleashed its power, it indeed shook the void for thousands of miles. Those who knew the inside story all knew that most of the main forces of the Taishu Temple were still in the mysterious sea. Currently, White Cloud Mountain, from the perspective of the Taishu Temple itself, was actually very empty. Even so, the great power that it displayed deeply moved all the human powers in the divine land. The huge formation above White Cloud Mountain was the protective formation of the Taishu Temple, the great formation of Yin Yang Void. Within the huge formation, black and white air currents spiraled continuously. Within it, 12 balls of light could be faintly seen. They were like the 12 stars in the void of the universe, shining brightly. In the vast heaven and earth, there seemed to be 12 faintly discernible streams of light that stretched out from the great formation of Yin Yang Void in all directions, connecting with the entire divine land. The streams of light flickered as if the divine land had its own life and was slowly pulsing. Large amounts of spiritual qi passed through the 12 streams of light and gathered in the formation. As the formation operated, a pair of eyes seemed to be looking at the entire Great Thousand World. The Great Void Nine Heavens Imperial Court, which was transformed from White Cloud Mountain, was shrouded by the great formation of Yin Yang Void. It spun in the void and disappeared from the divine land, entering the boundless void. In the void, there seemed to be an unprecedentedly bright star hanging at the top of the Great Thousand World, looking down on all life. One of the 2 tall Yudu beasts behind Mirage Sun Yudu said slowly, "Chief, just leave it to us. Everything changes in an instant. Time waits for no man." Mirage Sun Yudu shook his head. "The feud between our race and the Taishu Temple doesn't exist in an unfair fight." As he spoke, his aura suddenly surged. In the blink of an eye, the space around the divine land where White Cloud Mountain originally stood was completely shattered and turned into nothingness. The boundaries of the vast 1,000 domains above his head seemed to break apart as well. The void was annihilated into primal chaos. Everything ceased to exist, leaving only the lone bright star. Sun Mirage Yudu had a calm expression, and his body rose up. He stretched out his palm towards that huge lump of light that was like a star. A huge palm made of resplendent purple light grabbed out from the sky. It was so huge that it seemed like it was going to grab the huge ball of light formed by the Great Void Nine Heavens Imperial Court. The Great Void Yin Yang formation rotated, and a series of golden beams of light crashed down. Each beam of golden light was powerful enough to slay a Tao integration stage human cultivator or a Star Soul integration stage demon beast. Although these beams of golden light descended one after another, they formed a line in the void. It was like a huge blade that could split open the sky, and it wanted to shatter the huge hand of purple light. However, the palm of purple light grabbed the sky and grabbed the huge blade. As the golden light flickered, it was as though countless sharp blades were shooting through the void. Just the remnant golden light that scattered out was enough to slice open cracks in the void. However, no matter how fierce the golden light was, it couldn't break through the huge palm formed by the purple light. In the great void yin-yang formation, 12 balls of light shone together, and black and white air currents intertwined and spun continuously. There seemed to be no end to the power that was continuously supplied to the huge blade. At the same time, the gaze in the formation suddenly lit up, as though it had materialized and landed on Mirage Sun Yudu's body. There seemed to be a mysterious and marvelous power in the void that was suppressing Mirage Sun Yudu's demonic power. The 12 beams of light that stretched out from the great void yin-yang formation became clearer and clearer. They were like 12 ropes that were pulling something as they suppressed towards Mirage Sun Yudu. Mirage Sun Yudu's expression didn't change. On the surface of the huge palm formed by the purple light, large amounts of black light markings suddenly appeared and were engraved on the purple light palm. The mournful wail of the great Tao seemed to ring out in heaven and earth, and a violent feeling of power spread out from Mirage Sun Yudu's hand. The huge golden blade that was pinched by him actually started to shatter continuously. It was as though the boundless void and heaven were suppressing the power on Mirage Sun Yudu's body, and at that moment, a large amount of it started to rebound. This great demon of Yudu's palm gradually pulled back, and it actually shook the great void yin-yang formation as though it wanted to pull the huge formation back towards itself. Not only the formation, even the void that was pulled by the 12 beams of light that stretched out from the formation of the same generation seemed to be pulled by Mirage Sun Yudu. Below the great void yin-yang formation, the great void nine heavens imperial court that looked like a huge lump of light flashed, and a large amount of light rushed out from within. It transformed into a huge wave that surged towards Mirage Sun Yudu. The radiance that filled the air instantly drowned out Mirage Sun Yudu along with that purple light palm. The huge purple light palm gradually crumbled under the radiance that was like the sea tide. Meanwhile, Mirage Sun Yudu himself was also trapped by the radiance. However, in this radiance, Mirage Sun Yudu's expression was calm, as though he was taking a stroll. Large amounts of purple light flashed on his body, and the surface of the purple light was engraved with black inscriptions that looked as though they were corporeal. Under the impact of the sea tide-like radiance, these purple radiance and black light markings were also dissolving in large amounts. Mirage Sun Yudu raised his claw and swung it in the air. A miserable scar instantly appeared in the void, and with the power of splitting the sea, he forcefully split the radiance tide in front of him. At that moment, in the great void yin-yang formation, there was another beam of divine light that shot straight at him. Wherever that beam of divine light passed by, the void was instantly annihilated. At the borders of the divine light, there were countless chaotic storms that spread in all directions, destroying even more heaven and earth. And where the aftermath reached, it was clearly not as terrifying as the divine light itself. The targets that were covered by the divine light seemed to be unable to dodge at all. No matter how they dodged, they would be hit by the divine light. Even if they were placed in the boundless illusory world, the boundaries between real and fake would still be wiped out, and they would be killed in an instant. Mirage Sun Yudu raised his eyelids, and 2 beams of purple light shot out from his eyes as well. They merged into one in the air, and the purple color faded away. Instead, it became a blurry and transparent color. In this blurry and transparent light pillar, there seemed to be large amounts of black patterns swirling and dancing continuously, forming the core of the light pillar together. The transparent light pillar collided with the divine light given off by the great void yin-yang formation, and the result was that the divine light that was given off by the formation was shattered. But with such a disturbance, the sea of light from the great void nine heavens imperial court became even more majestic. It swept towards Mirage Sun Yudu once again, and it continuously broke the purple light that was protecting his body. This light seemed to be an ocean that was formed by the gathering of boundless great void mysterious light. It filled the surrounding void, and it was boundless. The mysterious light still wasn't dazzling, but at this moment it seemed to be the only reality, the only existence, the only reason in this world. Wherever the tide passed, only the light remained forever. Everything else turned into nothingness. Even the great demons of Yudu, who had their eyes on the top of their heads, looked at the sea of light and the great void nine heavens imperial court. Their expressions also became solemn. In the great void yin-yang formation, black and white air currents mixed and flowed continuously. They cycled over and over again, and their power seemed to be endless. When a divine light was broken, it didn't seem to be affected at all. Immediately, another beam of divine light shot out. Mirage Sun Yudu was trapped by this light, and he looked at the seemingly boundless sea of light around him as well as the divine light that was smashing towards his head. However, he shook his head instead. After Tai was injured by Brother Tianhai Emperor, all these years, he still hasn't nurtured a second cultivator of Taishu Temple that can execute the secrets of the heavens? Mirage Sun Yudu's face, which was no different from a human except for numerous purple light markings, actually revealed a faint smile. But that's true. After Wen Qiyang, after so many years, only Tai has appeared. As he said that, Mirage Sun Yudu suddenly let out a heaven-shaking roar. His roar didn't just shake the void, even the divine land, heaven wasteland, and the entire heaven primordial great world seemed to tremble slightly. The silver-white mane of this great demon of Udu started to grow thicker and longer. It spread in large amounts, and the purple light markings on the surface of his body were gradually covered by the silver-white hair. At the same time, boundless silver light flickered in the void. The surface of the silver light was plated with a layer of beautiful and enchanting purple radiance. It was as though a purple halo had appeared on the surface of a huge silver ball of light. On the purple halo, there were numerous black light markings that covered the surface of the purple halo. That violent power that shook heaven and earth made the great void nine heavens imperial court seem to lose its splendor at that moment. No matter if it was Tao Venerable Xian Yi and Yen Nanlai in the great void nine heavens imperial court, or Kuang Heng, Lin Daohan, and the rest in the great void Yin Yang formation, their hearts sank slightly. Mirage Sun Yudu had finally revealed his true form, and the strength of his power was indeed shocking. However, this wasn't what they were most concerned about. No matter if it was Tao Venerable Xian Yi Yen Nanlai, or Kuang Heng, they had personally fought with strong practitioners of various realms of the Yudu race back then, so they had plenty of experience. They knew very well what the most terrifying part of this race was. In almost an instant, Kuang Heng, Lin Daohan, and the rest of the 12 people controlled the great void yin-yang formation to descend. The huge formation completely fused into the great void nine heavens imperial court. The power of the great void nine heavens imperial court also rose wildly because of that. As boundless radiance shone, it was as though it was a kingdom of gods on earth, a celestial realm. However, at that moment, the great void nine heavens imperial court restrained its power instead. Large amounts of profound radiance gathered on itself, forming an all-out defense stance. At that moment, Mirage Sun Yudu's calm voice rang out in the void. Yudu Xianhua. A beam of black light that seemed resplendent and deep appeared. Along with the appearance of this beam of black light, the great Tao of heaven and earth gave off a clear and ear-piercing wail. Beams of brilliance interweaved and flashed in the void before shattering. As though there was no time interval, the moment this beam of black light appeared, it immediately bombarded the great void nine heavens imperial court. Chapter 1201. When the black light landed on the nine heavens of the great void palace, it instantly melted a large amount of the light around the palace like rolling snow. That indescribable profound radiance, upon coming into contact with the black radiance, seemed to suddenly become dazzling, clear, and bright. However, it lost the mysterious, invisible, indescribable, and indescribable profound power concept. It was as if it had fallen from the clouds to the mortal world. It looked dazzling and bright, but it was no different from the other light. It was as if it had faded into the crowd and lost its otherworldly nature. The light around the nine heavens of the great void palace seemed to be undulating like tumbling waves. It was gradually penetrated by the black light. The terrifying black light seemed to be able to destroy everything, and it made people's hearts tremble. It was different from the Yudu dark flower of heavenly sea Yudu in the past. This was the Yudu profound flower of Mirage Sun Yu. Although it wasn't as powerful as the Yu Wang heavenly seas, it still shook the nine heavens and 10 earths. The terrifying power that shook the great Tao of heaven and earth continuously attacked the nine heavens of the great void palace, as if it wanted to split the celestial realm formed by the white cloud mountain into two. The other strong practitioners of Yudu who were watching the battle nodded their heads slightly when they saw this sight. The great void temple's all-encompassing great void mysterious light is indeed extraordinary. Especially when used to defend, it truly has boundless wondrous uses. If it was someone else, even if their level of power was similar, they would probably be pierced through by Chief's Yudu profound flower. It's just a matter of time. Under Mirage Sun Yudu, one of the two strongest Yudu beasts present said indifferently, and the time is very short, and this is under the premise that we don't interfere. The Yudu beast behind him silently said, "Then should we make a move?" Chief said to finish the battle as soon as possible. Although the battle took place in the void outside the boundaries of the vast thousand domains, the powerful energy fluctuations still shook the entire human race world of the divine land and affected the hearts of all the people in the human race cultivation world. On the land of the southern wasteland, a golden rainbow stretched between heaven and earth, as if it connected the heavens. It was Zhu Yi's Permitha Golden Bridge. At this moment, there were 3 people standing on the Permitha Golden Bridge. Other than Zhu Yi and Sword Lord Tiangang, there was also a tall young man. This young man was dressed in a purple robe. His figure was tall and well-proportioned, and he was burly but not fat. He was extremely handsome, and his smooth black hair draped over his back. He was Lin Feng's disciple, Shi Tianhao. At this moment, Shi Tianhao did not look as casual as he usually did. There was no smile on his face and his eyes were cold. Silently, he stared at the domain passageway that connected the divine land and infinite region in the distance. Even though he couldn't see it nor sense it, Shi Tianhao knew that there was a heavenly dragon that had attained the last day's realm coiled up near the exit on the other side of the passageway, and it was in confrontation with his group on this side of the passageway. Shi Tianhao was silent, but he was like an active volcano that could erupt at any time, making others feel oppressed and ominous. Even though he knew that his opponent was the great demon of the Dragon Clan, Shun Dragon King, who had attained the last day's realm, Shi Tianhao did not hide his hostility at all. After knowing that Gu Lei and Li Kueyin had died, Shi Tianhao's mood immediately fell to the bottom of the valley. Fortunately, Yu Hongyan had already killed the murderer, Fang's Dragon King. Otherwise, Shi Tianhao's mood would have been even worse. Sword Lord Tiangang turned to look at Shi Tianhao. Just now, when the young man beside him saw the Fang's Dragon King's body that Yu Hongyan had brought back, he had directly swallowed more than half of the Fang's Dragon King's body in front of everyone. Even Sword Lord Tiangang, who had lived for a long time, frowned when he saw that terrifying aura. At that moment, Sword Lord Tiangang felt as though there was a humanoid beast standing in front of him. His strength was shocking, and his potential was even more shocking. Even though he was only at the primordial soul embodiment realm, his divine powers and dermic powers were enough to make the entire great heaven primordial world look at him. Sword Lord Tiangang speculated that even when he was at the Dao integration realm, he would not be a match for Shi Tianhao. This discovery made Sword Lord Tiangang, an expert at the Dharma ending realm, have no choice but to take this young man seriously. Although the other party's cultivation age was not even a fraction of his age, not to mention a fraction of his age, his strength and potential could not be ignored by Sword Lord Tiangang. Even though Shi Tianhao was still not a match for Sword Lord Tiangang, his growth over the years had already indicated that his future was limitless. On the other side, Zhu Yi was the same. In fact, he had already succeeded half a step ahead of Shi Tianhao. During the battle with the Kunlun Dragon King and the Blue Sky Dragon King, Zhu Yi's strength had suddenly increased. Sword Lord Tiangang was not sure if he had been holding back before, but he could not help but pay attention to the strange technique that seemed to be able to see through everything. Zhu Yi glanced at Shi Tianhao and said in a deep voice, "Tianlong Shen is much more composed than Tianlong Kuan. His state of mind is so calm that he doesn't seem like a dragon." Previously, when you guys came over from the vast land of infinite wilderness, Sword Lord Tiangang and I deliberately waited half a beat to receive you guys. It was such a good opportunity, but he refused to attack. Other opportunities will be even more difficult to find. Although he looked much calmer, Zhu Yi was also furious after knowing the exact news of Gu Lei and Li Kueyin's death. Shi Tianhao said, "Second senior brother, you and Sword Lord Tiangang have given that dragon quite a bit of pressure by guarding here. Why don't we leave first and rush to White Cloud Mountain? Then we can turn around and attack halfway." If that dragon wants to take the opportunity to attack Great Qin, we can block him head-on. Even if we can't kill him, we can still severely injure him." Although he was in a bad mood, Shi Tianhao did not lose his cool. Given their current strength, there was a limited chance for them to completely kill a primordial heavenly dragon in the Dharma-ending realm. Unless Tian Longshen fought to the death, if he wanted to escape, it would be very difficult to make him stay. If Tian Longshen really stayed to fight to the death, they would have to pay a heavy price to kill him, even if they had the geographical advantage. However, to Zhu Yi and Sword Lord Tiangang, although it was risky, it was a suggestion that was worth considering. The Yuta race had returned to the Divine Land and attacked the White Cloud Mountain of the Taishu Temple. At that moment, White Cloud Mountain was in a relatively empty state, and the situation was very dangerous. Although Zhu Yi and Shi Tianhao had already received the news that their master, Lin Feng, had returned from the vast land of infinite wilderness, the situation of the battle was confusing. No one could predict where it would go. To a certain extent, the cultivation world of the human race had lost the opportunity to strike first. If they wanted to turn the situation around, it was undoubtedly not advisable to continue staying the same. In a situation where they were already half a step behind, if they did not do anything, they would only fall further and further behind. Only by taking the initiative to break the situation could they effectively stop their disadvantage and take back the initiative. Zhu Yi and Sword Lord Tiangang were facing off against Shen Long King in the southern wasteland. At the same time, the other party didn't dare to act rashly. It also meant that they were being restrained by Shen Long King. In this situation, Zhu Yi and the rest naturally had to think of a way to change the situation. Previously, when Shi Tianhao and the rest returned from the vast land of infinite wilderness, they had made an attempt, but Shen Long King was very steady and didn't take the bait. Shi Tianhao's intention was to think of a way to lure the enemy deeper in. Unless they get the exact news that we have appeared on the battlefield of White Cloud Mountain and have already fought with the Yuta race, Tian Longshen most likely won't act rashly, Zhu Yi said. Only after the abnormality of Immortal Dragon City completely stabilizes will the imprint that second senior brother and Tian Long Kuan left behind be effective. How long will that take? Shi Tianhao transmitted his voice using magic power, and Zhu Yi replied with the same magic power. It won't be stabilized in a short period of time. Shi Tianhao nodded his head and didn't say anything more. He cupped his fists towards Zhu Yi and Sword Lord Tiangang. I'll leave this place to senior brothers. I'll head to West Tomb City now. Zhu Yi and Sword Lord Tiangang nodded their heads in greeting. Zhu Yi said, "Be careful on the way, take care of little junior sister, Goldie and Wanqiu." Shi Tianhao replied, "Of course." After saying so, he prepared to move, but he suddenly felt the heaven and earth tremble violently. Zhu Yi and Sword Lord Tiangang, who were beside him, also felt the abnormality, and they raised their heads to look at the sky in astonishment. With their eyesight, they could naturally see that the qi of Dragon Vein in the territory of Great Qin Dynasty had condensed into light dragons that shuttled through the sky. However, at this moment, the light dragons condensed by the qi of Dragon Vein seemed to have gone through a strange change. They seemed chaotic and unstable. The three of them looked down at the ground at the same time. They could clearly feel that the qi of the Earth Vein in the southern wasteland was originally compatible with the qi of Dragon Vein. They advanced and retreated together, resonating with each other. However, at this moment, it wasn't just the light dragons formed by the qi of Dragon Vein. Even the flow of the qi of the Earth Vein in the ground had become unstable. It's not just the chaos of losing control. Someone is forcefully changing it, causing it to fall into a different trajectory. Because it conflicts with the previous trajectory, it seems unstable. Zhu Yi's eyes flashed and he took a deep breath. At this time, Sword Lord Tiangang and Shi Tianhao didn't need his reminder to immediately understand. It's the Great Zhou Dynasty. They're fighting for the Chi of Dragon Vein with Great Qin. At this moment, in the main hall of the Great Qin Dynasty's palace in West Tomb City, a group of Great Qin Dynasty cultivators were shocked and furious. How did they do it? Shi Zongtang, who had already been enthroned as the new emperor, sat on the dragon throne at the top of the stairs in the main hall, wearing a dragon robe and a crown. He stared at the top of the main hall. Originally, there was an endless amount of dragon vein qi gathered here from the 4 domains, and then it was added to his body. However, at this moment, the qi of dragon vein was flowing in other directions and was intercepted by someone else. The Grand Imperial Palace. The Grand Imperial Palace has recovered to its peak state. Lord Ryang Shi Zongmao's expression was grim. However, something like this has never happened before, so we didn't know that the Grand Imperial Palace could have such an effect. When the Grand Imperial Palace was still on the throne, he was the only emperor of the Divine Land, the first human emperor of ancient times. After the Grand Imperial Palace fell, it was also heavily damaged, and until today, it had never recovered to its peak state. As such, no one knew that the Grand Imperial Palace at its peak state could forcibly gather the Qi of Dragon Vein in the entire Divine Land. A Great Qin Dynasty elder's expression was slightly sad. The Grand Imperial Palace, the Supreme Grand Imperial Palace. What a great Grand Imperial Palace! On the dragon throne, Shi Zongtang said in a deep voice, "After all, the Great Qin Dynasty has existed for many years. Even if Liang Pan has the Grand Imperial Palace, we still have a chance to fight back. We can't let him succeed." Chapter 1202. Shi Zongtang did not get up from his throne, but his hands continuously formed seals. 5 colored light gathered together and turned into a golden Dao fruit. The fruit of the way rose to the top of the palace, and beams of light shot out in all directions. The Great Qin Empire's capital, Xiling City, seemed to have turned into a massive magic formation. Countless talismans and inscriptions were connected together, forming a magic formation that covered the entire city. The light from the magic formation spread out in all directions, as if it was going to cover the entire Great Qin Empire's territory. At the center of this giant magic formation was naturally the Great Qin Imperial Palace. At this moment, within the Great Qin Imperial Palace, there were rays of golden light rising from the ground, as if there were thousands of pillars that connected the heavens and the earth. Within the sky full of golden light, there seemed to be a massive 5-clawed golden dragon dancing in the air. Above the palace, at the center of the giant magic formation, there was a massive disk made up of golden light. It continuously spun, gathering the dragon vein qi from all directions. However, at this moment, the golden disk's rotation seemed to be disrupted, and it continuously tilted and shook. Red, green, yellow, black, and white dragon qi continuously dissipated. The dissipating dragon qi passed through the boundless space and gathered in another direction. As it pulsed, the 5-colored light dragon's appearance gradually changed. It lost its original colors and became purplish gold. The purplish gold light dragon entered the space, and in the deep space, it was as if the heavens had chosen it, gathering the true dragons. In the distant Great Zhou Empire's territory, there was also a large amount of dragon vein qi gathering towards Tianjing City from all directions. The light dragons formed by the Great Zhou dragon vein qi were purplish gold in color. The purplish gold light dragons gathered in Tianjing City. At this moment, there was also a huge formation above Tianjing City that covered the sky. A large amount of dragon qi was gathered in this huge formation. Within Xiling City, Great Qin's emperor and ministers all had serious expressions. Apart from the new emperor Shi Zongtang, all of Great Qin's experts stood up and turned into rays of light as they flew out of the palace and went to the other important buildings within the palace. Under their control, another 9 massive pillars of light shot into the sky from the royal palace, forming a protective formation around the main hall of the royal palace. Together, they strengthened West Hill City's protective formation, helping the new Emperor Shi Zongtong stabilize the Great Qin's dragon vein qi, preventing it from being intercepted by Emperor Liang Pan of Zhou and the First Imperial Palace. Shi Zongtong's expression was solemn. He was the new emperor, and the inheritance of the dragon vein qi had yet to be completed. The former Emperor Shi Yu had personally led an expedition, but he had died in battle in Tianhuang mainland. This had caused a huge impact on the hearts of the people of Great Qin, causing the inheritance of the dragon vein qi to become extremely unstable. If there was enough time, then with the protection formations that West Hill City had built over the generations, unless the Great Zhou dynasty directly attacked West Hill City, Great Qin would be able to safely survive this disaster. However, after the First Imperial Palace was restored, it unexpectedly gathered all of the Divine Land's dragon vein qi, causing the Great Qin dynasty to be in a precarious situation. The Grand Emperor was the last human emperor of the primordial era. He was also the first human emperor of the human race after the heaven primordial world split into the Divine Land and Tianhuang mainland. The Grand Emperor, the creation treasure that he had created, had finally been restored after being heavily damaged, immediately dealing a silent blow to the Great Qin dynasty. Unlike the immortal Dragon City, which protected its own people and the human race, the First Imperial Palace carried the will of the Grand Emperor. It wanted to rule over all living beings, and no one dared to disobey it. It wanted to be the supreme leader of the world and the only ruler of the era. Even if the Great Qin dynasty did not lose the immortal Dragon City, it would still be at a disadvantage when facing the Great Zhou dynasty, which had the First Imperial Palace. If they had the immortal Dragon City, Shi Zongtong could rely on it to defend and survive the period when he had just ascended to the throne and the inheritance of the dragon vein qi. However, even though they pushed the West Hill City's formation to its limits, they could only watch as the dragon vein qi continued to leak out. What made Shi Zongtong, Shi Zongmao, and the other Great Qin experts' faces turn ashen was that the Great Qin dynasty's citizens, whom they had recruited and protected, were becoming more and more unstable. As the dragon vein qi was connected, a voice suddenly sounded out in the hearts of the Great Qin citizens. The Great Qin Emperor, Shi Yu, was greedy and blindly conquered the Tianhuang mainland. As a result, he died and Great Qin's soldiers died. He even lost the immortal Dragon City, implicating the citizens and causing them to fall into danger. Great Qin has lost its virtue and suffered this calamity. Today, the demon race has caused chaos and brought disaster to the Divine Land. We are here under the mandate of the heavens to protect our people. It was Emperor Zhou's Liang Pan's voice. His tone was calm but majestic. It was like the morning bell and evening drum, heavily striking everyone's heart. He was clearly the ruler of the Great Zhou dynasty, their mortal enemy. Even though his words were quite ordinary, they seemed to have a strange power that touched the hearts of the commoners of Great Qin, causing them to fall into a daze. Before they could even think about what he was saying, they couldn't help but want to kowtow and submit to his might. The people of Great Qin seemed to be strangely twisted at this moment. That strange power did not have any offensive properties, so the West Hill City's defensive formation could not defend against it. Monarch Zhenyang, Shi Zongmao, who had not returned to West Hill City and was still on his way, projected his magic power into the West Hill City Imperial Palace's main hall. When he heard Liang Pan's voice, he could not help but curse, "Liang Pan, that traitor." Emperor Zhou Liang Pan was clearly bullying the Great Qin dynasty because it had lost the immortal Dragon City and could not defend against the Grand Imperial Palace's strange power. He wanted to take drastic measures and destroy the Great Qin dynasty's foundation. Great Qin's new Emperor Shi Zongtong's expression was dark. As the people of Great Qin became more and more unstable, the Great Qin dynasty's dragon vein qi was being lost faster and faster. The way to resolve this was quite simple. Great Qin would immediately stop gathering its dragon vein qi. That way, if Emperor Liang Pan didn't take down Western Hill City, he wouldn't be able to continue to bewitch people. Even if he tried to take in Great Qin's dragon vein qi from outside, it would be much less effective. However, this way the Great Qin dynasty, which had already fallen into a crisis, would become even weaker, and the situation would become even more difficult. If the top experts of the Great Devils attacked, it would be difficult to defend, even if they would be instantly annihilated. However, if this continues, we'll just be supporting the enemy for nothing. Most of the dragon vein qi will be taken away by Liang Pan and the Grand Imperial Palace. Shi Zongtang frowned. One wrong step would lead to many more mistakes. In such a dangerous environment, everyone was staring at each other. Once one party made a mistake, the result would be a series of disasters until the offender was consigned to eternal damnation. It would be very difficult for them to catch their breath and turn things around. Just as Shi Zongtang ascended to the throne, the Great Qin dynasty faced a new crisis and fell into a difficult situation. By stopping the gathering of the dragon vein qi, they would be able to temporarily defend against the Great Zhou dynasty's sneak attacks, but it would not benefit Great Qin at all. In the following war between two worlds, they could only resign themselves to fate and pray that the devil race experts would not attack them. Even though Shi Tianhao and the others would come to West Hill City, with the war reaching its climax, no one would be able to guarantee their safety. Even if Xianmen Tianzong became furious, the Great Qin dynasty would definitely suffer losses. No matter how they tried to take revenge, the dead would be dead, and it would be difficult for them to come back to life. If they continued to gather the dragon vein qi, most of the dragon vein qi would be taken away by the Great Zhou dynasty. Shi Zongtang would only be able to keep a small portion. It was not even a question of whether he was willing to do so, and it was still unknown whether the limited power would be useful. Shi Zongmao looked at Shi Zongtang on the throne. Both of their expressions were extremely serious. Shi Zongtang said slowly, "I, the former emperor, and you are the same. We don't like to put our fate in the hands of others, but right now we can only trust the Taoist sect master and Xianmen Tianzong. Bear with it and leave one last chance for the Great Qin dynasty in the future. It's better than letting the Great Zhou dynasty benefit for nothing." Shi Zongmao looked at Shi Zongtang and sighed. "That's the only way." Shi Zongtang immediately pointed at the golden fruit of Wei floating above the palace. The fruit of Wei flashed slightly and turned back into a five-colored ray of light, dispersing in all directions. Even the dragon vein qi that was gathering around the Great Qin dynasty paused slightly and gradually calmed down. But right at this moment, a voice rang out in the sky above West Tomb City. Yudu has returned, and the entire Divine Prefecture is facing a crisis. I'm also trying to gather the power of the human cultivation world to defend against the Yudu race. This is something that everyone in the human cultivation world is duty-bound to do. It's fine if the spirit is willing but the strength is insufficient, and I won't force you. However, the Great Qin dynasty clearly still has strength to spare, yet you want to protect yourself. That's not wise. Don't you know that when the nest is turned upside down, no egg can remain intact? The expressions of Shi Zongtang and the rest changed slightly. That voice was from Emperor Zhou's Liang Pan. Then, Shi Zongtang, who still had the dragon vein qi around him, immediately felt that something was wrong. Through the dragon vein qi, he could feel an extremely huge pressure coming from the other side. The violent power followed the dragon vein qi that hadn't been completely cut off and attacked West Tomb City with a destructive force. The dragon vein qi couldn't be forcefully cut off, but the violent power could attack West Tomb City along the dragon vein qi. Shi Zongtang's gaze flickered, and he suddenly understood. Liang Pan, you guided the power of the Grand Imperial Palace and the dragon vein qi to White Cloud Mountain? Emperor Zhou's Liang Pan's tone was calm. Quickly gather the dragon vein qi, or else the current West Tomb City won't be able to withstand the power of you. Not only you, but the entire West Tomb City might be razed to the ground. As if to prove that he wasn't lying, the formation that shrouded West Tomb City started to shake violently. In the center of the formation, the sky above the Great Qin Imperial Palace flashed continuously. It looked like it was about to collapse at any moment. The strong practitioners of Great Qin that occupied the four corners and were activating the formation all felt the pressure. Those with weaker cultivations couldn't bear the pressure, and their primordial spirits started to suffer damage. In the main hall of the Imperial Palace, King Ruyang Shi Zhongmao roared at the sky with an expression of unwillingness. His magic power projection couldn't even be maintained and shattered. Chapter 1203. In the south wasteland of the Divine Land, Zhu Yi Shi Tianhao and Big Dipper Sword Venerable were also looking at the qi flow of the dragon vein that had suddenly become chaotic on the territory of Great Qin Empire. The circulation and gathering of the qi of the dragon vein had paused for a moment, but it quickly returned to normal. Shi Tianhao and the rest didn't understand. Zhu Yi crushed a sound transmission crystal, and the voice of Great Qin Empire's King Rosen Shi Zhongmao came from the other side. After explaining what had happened, Shi Zhongmao immediately asked, "When can Sect Master Lin reach White Cloud Mountain?" His voice was solemn and slightly bitter. "Now our Great Qin doesn't need to worry about where Yudu will choose after conquering White Cloud Mountain. Western Tomb City and White Cloud Mountain are completely tied together. If White Cloud Mountain is conquered by Yudu, under the influence of the Qi Meridian, Western Tomb City will also be affected and might be destroyed at any time." Shi Zhongmao's voice is very low. "We have already sent people to send the people who were originally gathered in West Hill City out of the city to the Kunlun Mountain area. His Majesty should be in contact with your sect's fellow Taoist Xiao Yin. We will have to trouble your sect to help look after them. If your teacher can rush over before White Cloud Mountain is conquered, there might be a way. If White Cloud Mountain is conquered first, Western Tomb City will be destroyed as well. At least the people can be protected." After Shi Zhongmao's magic power projection in Western Tomb City dissipated, he immediately received a communication from the new Emperor of Great Qin, Shi Zongtang, ordering him not to head to Western Tomb City anymore. Because he was heavily injured, Shi Zhongmao's speed was limited when he rushed back from the southern borders. Now that he received the news, he didn't need to return to Western Tomb City anymore. Not only him, but the other cultivators of Great Qin Empire also didn't need to return to Western Tomb City. However, Shi Zhongmao's mood wasn't good at all. That was because, including the new Emperor Shi Zongtang, all the higher-ups of Great Qin Empire, who had stayed behind in Western Tomb City, were forced to stay. The new Emperor Shi Zongtang himself couldn't leave, and the other strong practitioners of Primordial Spirit Realm had to help activate the formation of Western Tomb City. Otherwise, with the pressure from the other side, they would collapse before White Cloud Mountain was conquered. Shi Zongtang had clearly ordered Shi Zhongmao and the others not to return in order to preserve the last bit of vitality of the Qin dynasty. The Great Qin cultivators with relatively low cultivations were responsible for bringing the people who had been gathered here out of West Hill City. The high-level cultivators, including Shi Zongtang, were unable to leave. They could only try their best to support the array formation and gather the dragon vein qi, hoping that White Cloud Mountain could hold on until Lin Feng returned. If White Cloud Mountain was destroyed first, they could only live or die with West Hill City. They might not even be able to escape in time. Great Qin's new emperor, Shi Zongtang, was likely to become the shortest reigning emperor since the founding of the Great Qin Empire. Slowly, Zhu Yi said, "My master severely injured the enchantress in Infinite Wilderness Land and trapped the great sage and Zhu Yan in Deep Soul Mountain. He won't be able to come out for a while. He's already on his way to White Cloud Mountain." Given his speed, he'll be there soon. The war between the two worlds has destroyed the foundation of the mortal world. It's already a huge disaster. The lives of ordinary people should be protected. My eldest senior brother will make the appropriate arrangements. King Zhenyang, you don't have to worry. Shi Zhongmao sighed. Thank you for your trouble. After the communication was cut off, Zhu Yi looked at Shi Tianhao and Sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper, who both had solemn expressions. Sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper did not say anything, but his divine sense echoed in the space. The 9 Heavens Primordium Sword Array is about to be set up. If it succeeds, it will not help the situation in West Hill City, but it can help us deal with Tian Longshan. However, it will take some time. Many years ago, Shu Mountain and the other 8 major swordsmanship sects had formed the 9 Heavens Sword Union. Although they all had their own agendas, it was still a powerful union. All along, Shushan had been intent on bringing all the Sword Dao sects under its command. Besides the great immortal heavens' 1,000 images sword formation and the 6 meridians heavenly immortal sword formation, a third powerful formation was born. It was the heavenly immortal sword formation of Primordium. The idea was to use Shu Mountain as the core to gather the sword chi and sword intent of the other 8 major swordsmanship sects, condense them into one, and further enhance their power. Unlike the great immortal Heaven Thousand Phenomenon Sword Array, which could attract all the swords in the world but needed to defend Shu Mountain, the immortal Primordium Sword Array could move with the immortal Heaven Sword. However, this array had always existed in the idea because the Primordium Sword Stone, a key to setting up the array, had always been missing. Rumor had it that the immortal Heaven Sword had not been completely refined and was still in its embryonic stage. When it was just born, it gave birth to 2 treasures that were completed before the immortal Heaven Sword. From these 2 treasures, 3 great ancient swords were born: the ancient sword of Heavenly Dipper, the ancient sword of Firmament, and the ancient sword of Taiching. One of the 2 treasures was the sect-returning scabbard, which could store all the swords in the world. It had been broken in the Battle of Shu Mountain all those years ago. Before that, it had always been the cornerstone treasure of the Shu Mountain Sword sect, second only to the immortal Heaven Sword. The other treasure was the Primordium Sword Stone. Like the sect-returning scabbard, it had no offensive power. However, the Primordium Sword Stone could sharpen all the swords in the world, improving sword dharma treasures. Even the immortal Heaven Sword could be sharpened with this treasure. After a long time, it would gain something. However, when Jihuang Shinyuan had destroyed the sect gate, the void had shattered and everything was in chaos. The Primordium Sword Stone had been lost at that time. Shu Mountain had been searching for the Primordium Sword Stone for many years, but they had never found anything. The immortal Heaven Primordium Sword Array had been created because of Shu Mountain's study of the mysterious power and intent of the Primordium Sword Stone. Although they had tried to find a substitute, they had not succeeded. Although the immortal Heaven Primordium Sword Array had been created, it had remained on paper and could not be turned into reality. As a result, few people in the world knew about it. However, a few years ago, the previous sect master of the Shu Mountain Sword sect, Xian Longxing, who had been traveling and had disappeared without a trace, suddenly appeared and returned to the sect with the Primordium Sword Stone. Although Xian Longxing had left the sect again soon after and his whereabouts were unknown, the fact that the treasure had returned to Shu Mountain still brightened the gloomy mood of the people of Shu Mountain a little. However, what made them smile bitterly was that although the Primordium Sword Stone had returned to the sect, one of the 3 keys of the immortal Heaven Primordium Sword Array, the immortal Heaven Sword, had been destroyed in the Battle of Shu Mountain. However, after serious consideration by Big Dipper Sword Venerable, he made changes to the immortal Heaven Primordium Sword formation. He gave up the absolute control that Shu Mountain Sword sect had over the sword formation with the immortal Heaven Sword sect. He turned the immortal heaven primordium sword formation into the nine heavens primordium sword formation. Although its power was slightly inferior, it finally became a reality. As Big Dipper Sword Venerable led a large number of strong practitioners of Shu Mountain into the war between the two worlds and the news that the Yuta race had returned to the Heaven Primordial World, the Heavenly Sword Sect, Thunderbolt Sword Sect, and the rest of the 8 big sword sects decided to temporarily put aside their hatred for Shu Mountain because of the immortal Heaven Sword and join forces with the Shu Mountain Sword Sect to set up the formation. At least, in this war between the two worlds, the big sacred grounds of the Sword Path decided to temporarily put aside their former enmity and work together. They didn't need to be on the battlefield directly. They only needed to activate the Nine Heavens Primordium Sword Formation and provide long-range support. However, under the cooperation of many parties, the sword formation was also in the early stages. It still needed constant coordination before it could be used. It was still in the preparation stage, but it was already nearing the end and could be used in actual combat. After Zhu Yi and Shi Tianhao returned to the Divine Land, they already knew about this news. Zhu Yi looked at Big Dipper Sword Venerable. The person participating in setting up the formation is the current sect master of your sect? After Xian Longxing abdicated, the current sect master of Shu Mountain Sword Sect was the previous Sword Venerable of Shaoyang. Big Dipper Sword Venerable answered, "That's right." Zhu Yi asked, "Forgive me for being blunt, but your sect's Sword Venerable Tsangming, whose realm is second only to you." Big Dipper Sword Venerable shook his head. "Tsangming is in seclusion, so he probably won't be able to make it in time for the war between the two worlds. Unless Shu Mountain is completely destroyed, he won't be able to sense what's happening outside." Zhu Yi and Shi Tianhao nodded and didn't say anything more. Shi Tianhao's voice transmission landed in Zhu Yi's ears. "I'll rush to West Hill City as fast as I can." Zhu Yi was silent for a moment. "How confident are you? If you don't succeed, it won't change anything. You might even be in danger. Less than 50%. Shi Tianhao didn't have the usual playful expression on his face. He said solemnly, "I've just gotten that thing, so it works sometimes. I don't dare to say I'm too confident. Even though I didn't see it with my own eyes, there are strange phenomena in heaven and earth, and the flow of spirit qi is shaking non-stop. Yudu probably has the absolute advantage in attacking White Cloud Mountain. With the help of the qi of Dragon Vein from Great Zhou and Great Qin, it's still unknown how long they can last. If White Cloud Mountain is really breached before Master returns, West Hill City will suffer as well." Shi Tianhao said, "I might not be able to save West Hill City, but if I succeed, I might be able to help the cultivators of Great Qin escape." He turned his head to look at the realm passage in the south. "If it's just saving people, Second Senior Brother's Permitha Golden Bridge is naturally more convenient. However, Tian Longshin is still here, and he's a great demon on the Last Day's realm. He needs Second Senior Brother, who has a creation treasure, and Big Dipper Sword Venerable, who is also on the Last Day's realm to deal with him. Even though I can't wait to skin those long worms, it's still slightly inconvenient to deal with an opponent on the Last Day's realm. If that thing works, it can block the magic power of the great demon's divine arts, but it can't block the Last Day's calamity." Shi Tianhao continued to say, "That's why it's better if I go to West Tomb City. It just so happens that whether Yudu can break through White Cloud Mountain before Master comes back or not is also uncertain. It's also a good match for me." Zhu Yi heard what Shi Tianhao said and knew that what he said was true. If he brought the Permitha Golden Bridge to West Hill City, Shenlong King might make a move. If Shi Tianhao and Big Dipper Sword Venerable work together to fight against Shenlong King, let's not talk about the result first. In terms of fighting style, Shenlong King could completely replicate the method Big Dipper Sword Venerable had used against Kuan Dragon King and Jade Sky Dragon King. Even though they had always been planning to ambush Shenlong King, the other party's personality was completely different from Kuan Dragon King they had met before. He was so calm that there was no arrogance of the dragon race. Chapter 1204. Shenlong King, who had just entered the Dharma-ending realm and achieved the body of the primordial heavenly dragon, did not seem to be in high spirits or eager to show off his power and establish his prestige. Although they didn't have much contact, Zhu Yi had already fully understood that this demon was a typical master who wouldn't act unless he saw a rabbit. If he wasn't sure that Zhu Yi, the golden bridge of the Permitha realm, or the Tiangang sword venerable had actually appeared in West Hill City or White Cloud Mountain, Shenlong King wouldn't make his next move. Zhu Yi said, "It seems that the Nine Heavens Taichu sword formation still needs some time to be put to use. If we can make it in time, although it may not be of help to West Hill City and White Cloud Mountain, it can help the Southern Wasteland Realm Passage and help Sword Venerable Tiangang to deal with Shenlong King. Little brother, if there is time, I will go to help you. But before that, you must be careful." Shi Tianhao nodded. "Don't worry, second brother, I understand." Then he cupped his fists and bowed to Zhu Yi and Sword Venerable Tiangang. Then he broke through the void and flew away. Lu Yuan the great sage and Zhuge Zhan still followed him. Zhu Yi and Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper stood on the Permitha Golden Bridge and watched as Shi Tianhao and the other two left. Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper crushed a sound transmission crystal and used his divine sense to send a message. "Wen Rui, how much longer do you need?" Ji Wen Rui, the former Sword Venerable of Shaoyang and the current leader of Mount Shu Sword Sect, answered, "The sword formations at the gates of each sword sect have all been set up. Now they are using the Taichu Sword Stone to do the final coordination. At most 3 to 5 days, at least today." Sword Venerable Tiangang frowned slightly. For cultivators to practice, forge weapons, or set up formations, 1 to 2 days, or even 3 to 5 days were almost negligible units of time. But for the current situation, it was changing rapidly. Every second counted. At Sword Venerable Tiangong's level, the wailing of the Great Way coming from the direction of White Cloud Mountain was almost deafening. The spiritual qi in the divine land became more and more chaotic. After receiving the qi of the dragon vein guided by the power of the Supreme Imperial Palace, the spiritual qi calmed down a little, but the situation was still getting worse. The Big Dipper Sword Venerate could not estimate how much longer White Cloud Mountain could last. However, he didn't say anything. Ji Wen Rui and the others were already doing their best, raising their speed to the limit. This was all thanks to the fact that he had led the Shushan sword cultivators to participate in the battle with all their might and expressed his attitude in advance. This allowed the experts of the other sword sects to temporarily regain their trust in Shushan and work together. Otherwise, based on what happened to the Immortal Heaven Sword, the other sword cultivators would find it hard to trust the Shu Mountain Sword sect. They would rather die in battle than return to the cage of the Immortal Heaven Sword. "Has there been any news from Sangming's side?" slowly asked after a moment of silence. Ji Wenrui answered, "Elder Sangming and the others seem to be in a state of confusion. Their sword hearts are clouded, and they are unable to extricate themselves." Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper quietly replied, "I understand. You should focus on preparing the sword array. At this moment, the more power we have against the demons, the more it counts as." "I understand." Ji Wenrui, who had ended his conversation with Sword Honorable Tiangang, sighed to himself, "If only Elder Sangming could be like Elder Tiangang. Even Tai Yin, Guanchong, and the others." Sigh. Ji Wenrui shook his head and turned around to look at the huge spirit design in front of him. Tens of thousands of strands of sword qi soared into the sky, seemingly transforming into a giant sword that pointed straight at Sangming. In the center of the sword array was a square black stone. It looked inconspicuous and floated silently in the air. However, when the sharp sword chi that could cut through the void landed on the surface of the black stone, it did not leave a single mark. 9 faint black lines extended from the black stone. One of the black lines was connected to the center of the sword array in front of Ji Wenrui, while the other 8 black lines penetrated deep into the void. The 8 black lines were connected to the mountain gates of the other 8 great sword sections. There was also a sword formation in each of those places, and it was fused with the grand formation of the 8 great sword sects mountain gates to receive the energy from them. Shushan's great immortal manifestation sword array had already been broken. At this moment, a large number of Shushan sword cultivators gathered their own sword chi and sword intent. Under the leadership of Ji Wenrui and the others, they built the Shushan sword array together. The power of the 9 major sword arrays was gathered on the grand primordium sword stone, and it was constantly being tempered. Above the grand primordium sword stone, 9 orbs of light lit up. These 9 orbs of light formed a formation, and endless sharp auras emanated from them. Of these 9 orbs of light, some shone with starlight, some were like the sun and moon alternating, some were like the vast ocean, and some were filled with continuous thunderbolts and rumbling thunder. The orbs of light rose and fell. They looked like they had not completely stabilized, but the formation had basically taken shape. A middle-aged man in hemp clothes and straw shoes stood silently beside Ji Wenrui. He was the master of one of the 6 lineages of Shushan, the fierce swordsman of the Fierce Li lineage. He looked at the 9 orbs of light. Slowly, he said, "What a pity, what a pity." Ji Wenrui knew what he meant. He shook his head and said, "This can't be helped." The fierce swordsman of the Fierce Li was feeling that it was a pity. The 9 major sword sects were different in strength. Now that they were united, it was not easy to coordinate. The Heavenly Sword sect was led by the sect leader, the Heavenly Sword Venerate, who had just reached the Tao integration stage, and the Lightning Sword sect was led by the Void Return to Tao integration stage Sword Venerate. Besides, the Flowing Light Sword Lord and the Star Constellation Sword Lord, as well as the current sect leader of the Shushan Sword sect, Ji Wenrui, were all at the Void Reversion and Tao integration realm. The Raging Fire Sword Lord, the Great Wilderness Sword Lord, the Glorious Sun Sword Lord, and the Moonlight Sword Lord were all at the Primordial Spirit Embodiment realm. The slightly regretful thing was that the Vast Sea Sword sect's sect leader, the Vast Sea Sword Venerable, had gone into seclusion to break through to the Tao integration realm before the war between the 2 worlds. He had not come out of seclusion until now. The Vast Sea Sword sect's sword array could only be presided over by the Void Reversion Realm Sword Venerable Emerald Wave. The fierce swordsman said, "If you and Vast Sea can both reach Tao integration, the sword array's power will increase after it is successfully set aside." Ji Wenrui said, "That's all we can do for now. Let's do what we have on hand." He looked at the fierce swordsman. "After the sword array is completely set up, you will bring the Genesis Sword Stone and the 9 Heavens Genesis Sword Array to the Southern Wilderness and hand them over to Elder Big Dipper. I will stay here in Shushan to preside over the sword array." The fierce swordsman nodded. "I understand." He paused for a moment and looked like he wanted to say something. Ji Wenrui looked at the fierce swordsman strangely. It was rare to see this fellow disciple show such emotions. The fierce swordsman met Ji Wenrui's gaze. Slowly, he said, "Not long ago, there was a sudden surge of sword chi in the mountain. However, it disappeared very quickly. Did you sense it, Sect Master?" A shadow appeared in Ji Wenrui's eyes. "I sensed it. It seemed to be the sword chi and sword will of Elder Tsang Ming. It seemed like he wanted to reconstruct his heart of the sword, but he failed in the end." The fierce swordsman muttered to himself, "Is that all? Why do I have a strange feeling in my heart?" Hearing this, Ji Wenrui did not speak. In fact, he had the same feeling in his heart. For this reason, he had even specially paid a visit to the fierce swordsman, but he had found nothing. However, this did not make him feel at ease. Previously, in his conversation with the fierce swordsman had specially asked about the situation of the fierce swordsman. Ji Wenrui had a feeling that it was not just a simple concern. Although the fierce swordsman was not in Shushan, as a great sword cultivator of the Dharma-ending realm, he had probably vaguely sensed something. However, the fierce swordsman looked like a dispirited old man from beginning to end. There was nothing strange about him. Ji Wenrui could only temporarily suppress the doubts in his heart. He took a deep breath and looked at the fierce swordsman. For now, let's focus. Before he finished speaking, the expressions of Ji Wenrui and the fierce swordsman changed at the same time. From the peak of Shushan, a stream of light suddenly flew down and fell into the sword array before them. The stream of light fell into the center of the array formed by the 9 balls of light and stopped above the absolute beginning sword stone. It was a white jade longsword whose blade had been broken in the middle. Although it was a broken sword, how could Ji Wenrui and the fierce swordsman not recognize it? It was the mountain treasure of Shushan town in the past, the emperor of the heavenly Yuan swords, the immortal heaven sword. When the white jade broken sword fell into the 9 heavens absolute beginning sword array, the absolute beginning sword stone trembled slightly. Ji Wenrui was shocked and wanted to stop it. Suddenly, he felt a chill in his heart. Turning around, he saw a skinny old man standing behind him and the fierce swordsman. It was the other grand elder of Shushan besides the fierce swordsman, the fierce swordsman. At this moment, the fierce swordsman was surrounded by sword chi and sword will. It was as if he could cut through the heaven and earth. Although he had not reached his peak in the past, he was not far from it. He was like a peerless divine sword that shook the heavens and the earth. However, Ji Wenrui and the fierce swordsman felt a strange feeling from this old man. It made their hearts tremble, and they actually felt a faint fear. The expression of the fierce swordsman was unusually calm. His gaze fell on Ji Wenrui. Wenrui, did you send Xiaoyang here to spy on me? He opened his palm and revealed a small world formed by sword chi. Within it there was a person. Although he was not dead, he had fallen into an unconscious state and was floating within. It was Ji Wenrui's disciple, the former fierce swordsman, and now the new fierce swordsman. Ji Wenrui looked at the fierce swordsman. Elder fierce swordsman, what exactly are you? A thunderous voice came from the thin body of the fierce swordsman. Wenrui, I should be the one asking you. What exactly are you doing? Can't you see that this is the best time for us to reforge the immortal heaven sword? The expressions of Ji Wenrui and the fierce swordsman changed at the same time. The fierce swordsman ignored them. He formed a sword seal with his right hand and pointed at the grand primordium sword stone and the broken white jade sword. The 9 heavens grand primordium sword formation in front of him immediately changed. The 9 light balls floating in the air actually began to gradually fuse, forming a white ring that surrounded the grand primordium sword stone and the broken white jade sword at the same time. In the next moment, the broken white jade sword and the white ring disappeared in the void together. The black grand primordium sword stone shook violently. There seemed to be no other sound in the void except for the sound of swords being sharpened. Chapter 1205. The sound of a sword being sharpened came from the black primordium sword stone. The sound was clear and pleasant, containing a mysterious rhythm. It was as if the great Tao of heaven and earth were faintly humming at this moment, making one feel relaxed and happy. 4 sword cultivators like Ji Wenrui and sword master Li Meng, this humming was enough to make them feel happy both physically and mentally. However, Ji Wenrui and sword master Li could not feel happy at all. They looked at sword master Tsangming in shock. Elder Tsangming, what exactly are you? Sword master Tsangming turned around and said with a thunderous voice, the other 8 sword sects, whether it's the Tongtian, Thunderbolt, Songhai or Lai Hua sects, Their swordsmanship all originates from Shu Mountain. Now, with them as the foundation, we can use them to nurture the immortal heaven sword. Then, with the power of the primordium sword stone, we can reforge the immortal heaven sword. Ji Wenrui's expression was solemn. Elder Tsangming, the divine land is in danger right now. Isn't it inappropriate for you to do this? Sword Master Tsangming looked at Ji Wenrui with disappointment. Wenrui, can't you see through such a simple logic? Let me ask you, why did we set up this immortal primordium sword array? Ji Wenrui was not in the mood to correct Sword Venerable Firmament's appellation of the sword array. He said in a deep voice, "That's to gather the strength of my 9 heavens sword union and fight against the demon race in the war between the 2 worlds." Through the 9 heavens primordium sword array, there was hope that the combined power of the 9 sword sects would produce a qualitative change. Sword Master Tsangming said indifferently, "That's right. Gathering our power and fighting against the demon race is the ultimate goal. Since that's the case, what's wrong with reforging the immortal heaven sword?" The immortal primordium sword array is a combined effort, and so is the forging of the immortal heaven sword. Ji Wenrui stared at Sword Venerable Firmament and said in a deep voice, "But this will cause the 9 heavens sword union to fall apart again. Moreover, the ritual you're performing right now to reconstruct the immortal heaven sword might completely drain all the power of the major sword sects' grand formations." Sword Venerable Firmament smiled. His aged face revealed an extremely arrogant and sharp aura. This was the arrogance that most of the Shushan sword cultivators of the past were used to. Since when do we, the Shushan sword cultivators, have to listen to those trash when we do things? Honorable Swordsman Li Meng remained silent. Ji Wenrui took a deep breath and said, "Elder Tsangming." Sword Sovereign Firmament directly interrupted his words. "This old one knows very well what Senior Brother Tiangang and you are thinking. It's nothing more than being apprehensive of the Celestial Gates, Sect Master and Xianmen Tianzong." There seemed to be infinite sword intent bursting out of his thin body, but his tone was still calm. "One day, Mount Shu will compete with Xianmen Tianzong in swordsmanship again, and we will find a chance to take revenge for the humiliation of having our mountain gate crushed in the past. But not now. Even if the immortal heaven sword is reforged, not now." Silently, Sword Venerable Firmament said, "The Celestial Gate Master's power is already established, and his ominous sword is even more complete. I have no intention of using the immortal heaven sword to fight him again, but this does not mean that we have to lower our heads. It is precisely because we want to take revenge in the future that we have to seize every opportunity to improve ourselves. Only then will the immortal heaven sword have the chance to fight against heaven punishment again." Sword Venerable Firmament swept a glance at Ji Wenrui. "This is not something that can be done with empty words or determination. We have to put it into action. The Celestial Gate Master and Xianmen Tianzong will not stand still and wait for us. They are also advancing. If we do not put in more effort, we will only be getting further and further away from them. What difference is there between that and waiting for death and slowly committing suicide? This old one is not talented, but I do not like to deceive myself and others." Sword Venerable Firmament's gaze turned towards the primordium sword stone. "This old one prefers things that can be seen and touched, and I prefer to receive tangible rewards for my efforts." Although he was facing one of the few elders in the sect, Ji Wenrui still said silently, "Elder Firmament, the revitalization of our Shu Mountain does not lie in whether or not we can defeat Xianmen Tianzong. The key lies in ourselves." "That's right. As long as you and Elder Tiangang are here, even if our Shu Mountain is extremely weak today, and the other 8 major swordsmanship sects join forces, they will still not be a match for our Shu Mountain. However, our gazes should not only be focused on them." Sword Venerable Firmament withdrew his gaze and looked towards Ji Wenrui. The disappointment on his face grew heavier and heavier. This old one originally thought that you were also carefully planning for this moment in front of us. Who knew that this is not the case? You are simply worried about the friendly relationship between Xianmen Tianzong and the Thunderbolt Sword Sect, the Wilderness Sword Sect, and the Celeritas Sword Sect. However, does this make your hands and feet tied? Back then, the Celestial Gate Master's sword not only broke the Celestial Sword, but also the backbone of our Shu Mountain? Wenrui, look at yourself now. You don't even dare to feel anger towards Xianmen Tianzong. You don't even have the heart to resist, and you don't have the will to win? Back then, the dragon was born far away. He chose you to take over the position of sect master because he wanted you to be mature and steady. However, he didn't want you to be steady to become petty and cowardly. Previously, when you guys reconstructed the sword heart, it was to reconstruct a sword heart that no longer has any edge and is like blunt iron. Sword Venerable Firmament's voice became more and more like thunder exploding in Ji Wenrui and Sword Venerable Li Meng's ears. Ji Wenrui's face was slightly pale. He looked towards Sword Venerable Firmament. Elder Firmament, please reconsider. Although Sword Venerable Firmament's current situation was a little strange, his cultivation was not far from his peak in the past. Not to mention that Ji Wenrui and Sword Venerable Li Meng were only at the Void Return Realm. Even if they were at the Void Return Realm and Dao Integration Realm, they would still not be a match for Sword Venerable Firmament. Whatever Sword Venerable Firmament wanted to do, they could not stop him at all. However, as Ji Wenrui looked at the sword formation in front of him, he felt more and more apprehensive. If you do this now, the situation will only suddenly collapse. Sword Venerable Firmament's expression did not change at all. His gaze also landed on the sword formation in front of him. The situation is under control. It won't collapse. He turned his head to look at Ji Wenrui and Sword Venerable Li Meng. You guys seem to have forgotten that although this heavenly immortal sword formation was created through the combined efforts of everyone, I was the main person who created this sword formation. I've spent more effort on this sword formation than everyone else combined. It has even delayed my own cultivation. Otherwise, I would have long since ascended to the Dharma-ending realm like senior brother Tiangang. Sword Venerable Firmament's expression was relaxed. Although Tongtian, Thunderbolt, and the others are guarding their respective mountain gate formations, as long as they have already merged our sword formation with their own mountain gate formations, they are destined to be unable to affect the ritual that I'm currently carrying out. The heavenly immortal sword formation was created to establish Shu Mountain's absolute control over the sword Dao sects in the world. Although Tongtian and Thunderbolt are both Void Return and Dao Integration cultivators, they are completely insufficient in front of me. A proud smile seemed to appear on his aged face. Do they think that just because they are Void Return and Dao Integration cultivators, they are completely insignificant in front of me? If it were not for Xianmen Tianzong and Taishu Temple, they are still far from being able to cause trouble in front of Shu Mountain on their own. If it were not for Xianmen Tianzong and Taishu Temple, I would have used the power of the sword formation to directly suppress and kill them in their own mountain gate formations. They might not even be able to react in time. Ji Wenrui and Sword Venerable Li Meng's hearts trembled when they heard this. Sword Venerable Firmament said indifferently, "If we can directly sacrifice all of them to the sword, we will have more confidence in recasting the heavenly immortal sword. However, out of consideration for Taishu Temple and Xianmen Tianzong, we will let them go for now." 2 Dao Integration cultivators, a few Void Return cultivators, and a few Primordial Spirit incarnations. How can they compare to our sect's creation Dharma treasure, the heavenly immortal sword? If we can use their combined strength to jointly promote the recasting of the heavenly immortal sword, they will be able to play a role far beyond their original value. We are now in a war between two worlds, and the human race is in a more critical situation. This is actually the best way to concentrate our strength. Didn't you all have the same intention when you activated the heavenly immortal sword formation previously? Sword Venerable Firmament placed his hands behind his back and turned his back to Ji Wenrui and Sword Venerable Li Meng. He looked calmly at the sword formation before him. However, a turbulent sword intent and sword chi surged from his small body, filling the entire world where Shu Mountain was located and firmly enveloping Ji Wenrui and Sword Venerable Li Meng behind him. Ji Wenrui and Sword Venerable Li Meng could clearly feel that if they made any rash moves, thousands of swords would immediately attack from the void above and below them. What caused their hearts to go cold was that the sword insight that was concealed shockingly contained piercingly cold killing intent. They didn't doubt in the slightest that Sword Exalt Firmament would really annihilate them here if they made the slightest movement of resisting or disturbing it. The world is in chaos. For everyone, it is like rowing a boat against the current. If you don't advance, you will fall behind. Everyone is fighting for their own opportunities. A voice sounded behind Ji Wenrui and Sword Venerable Li Meng. If others can fight for it, Shu Mountain will naturally fight for it too. Ji Wenrui and Sword Venerable Li Meng sighed at the same time. The person who had spoken was Sword Venerable Taiying. They could clearly feel that besides Sword Venerable Taiying, Sword Venerable Shaozi, Sword Venerable Guanchong, and Sword Venerable Shaoshang were all great sword cultivators of Shu Mountain who were like Sword Venerable Firmament before them. None of these people had recovered to their peak condition, but they were not far from it. However, Sword Exalt Lunar and the others were like Sword Exalt Firmament, causing Ji Wenrui to feel a sense of unfamiliarity and strangeness. Sword Venerable Firmament's cultivation was much higher than his, so Ji Wenrui could not see it clearly. However, feeling Sword Venerable Taiying and the others behind him, he could finally clearly describe what that strange feeling was. Sword Venerable Taiying and the others were like peerless blades that had been resharpened. They revealed their sharpness and seemed to be able to cut through everything. However, although the blades of these peerless divine swords were incomparably sharp, the bodies of the swords were twisted and turned. Although they were sharp, they gave off an extremely strange and disharmonious feeling. Ji Wenrui said solemnly, "You are all like evil swords." Sword Venerable Firmament turned a deaf ear to these words. Sword Venerable Taiying and the others were not angered. Instead, they smiled slightly. Swords are just swords. They are not divided into good or evil, only sharp or blunt. The key is whether they are sharp or not. Everything else is just fanciful. Ji Wenrui looked up to the sky and sighed. You are sharp but easy to break. The sword formation in Shu Mountain continued to operate, almost endlessly absorbing the power of the great formations of the other sword sections. This gradually made the others feel uneasy and confused. Sword Venerable Tong Tian and the others, who were not completely at ease with Shu Mountain, immediately became vigilant. And Sword Venerable Tiangang, who was in the southern wasteland realm's passageway, discovered the abnormality almost immediately. Chapter 1206. Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper's expression changed slightly. He looked in the direction of Shushan. He could vaguely feel that the sword formation of Heavenly Taichu that he had turned into the Nine Heavens Taichu sword formation seemed to have returned to its original state. At this moment, the only person in Shushan who could do this was Sword Venerable Firmament. The uneasiness in his heart seemed to have become reality at this moment. What made Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper frown was that he felt the great Tao of heaven and earth shaking, as if the heavenly sword was about to be born again. As the most powerful sword cultivator in the Shushan sword sect, Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper was undoubtedly sensitive to the heavenly sword. Not only him, but his sword, the ancient Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper, was also shaking as if cheering. At this time, Zhu Yi also received messages from Sword Venerable Thunderbolt and Sword Venerable Streamer. They were not sure of the situation, but they felt that the development was a bit abnormal. They were already a little vigilant, and now they were even more vigilant. Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper, are you in contact with Shushan now? Zhu Yi turned to look at Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper. What is the situation at Shushan now? Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper was expressionless. He looked in the direction of Shushan, and then back at the entrance of the domain passage. Almost without thinking, Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper, who also had some understanding of the sword formation of Heavenly Taichu, immediately understood what was happening at Shushan. But at this moment, he could not split himself. On the other side of the domain passage, Shun Dragon King was watching the movement at the Divine Land. Although his character was calm, different from the Kunlun Dragon King and the other members of the Dragon Tribe, it did not mean that Shun Dragon King was really timid. That expert of the Dragon Tribe was just silently waiting for an opportunity. When the opportunity came, he would not have the slightest hesitation, nor would he have any scruples when making a move. Zhu Yi stood on the Permitha Bridge with his hands behind his back. He also stared at the entrance of the domain passage. If Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper is in a hurry, you can go first. I will keep watch here. Although Shushan is some distance from here, it is much closer than West Hill City, and the round trip is faster. Zhu Yi said, moreover, it's not a big demon that's causing trouble at Shushan. It's inconvenient for Sky Dragon Shun to get the news. Even if he did get the news, he might not dare to believe it easily. He has also been guarding against us, setting up an ambush for him. Your Excellency, if you leave quickly and come back quickly, as long as there are no big changes in the southern wasteland, you will be safe for a short period of time. The Celestial Dipper swordsman was silent for a moment. His consciousness reverberated in the air. I will return to the southern wasteland very soon. Before that, I will let you deal with me. As soon as he finished speaking, he transformed into a strand of sword light that left the Permitha Bridge and flew towards the northwest. Shi Tianhao and the others, who were on their way to West Hill City, also received the news. Although they did not know the specific situation, they knew that it was unusual. Shi Tianhao looked at Luo Qingwu. Little junior sister, let's split up here. He was going to West Hill City just in case. He was going to save people. If something really happened, it would be a great danger. If Luo Qingwu and the others followed him, they would inevitably be caught in the crossfire. Whether it was Luo Qingwu or the other younger disciples, this time they came out to gain experience. Some situations were obviously beyond their ability, so they naturally would not take the initiative to get involved. Therefore, Shi Tianhao and the others had already discussed that Zhuge Zhan would bring Luo Qingwu and the others back to the Kunlun mountain range, while Shi Tianhao would go to West Hill City by himself. Only great sage Lu Yuan would accompany him to take care of him. The great Qin dynasty would send ordinary people to the Kunlun mountain range. For the sake of safety, Xiao Yan left the Kunlun mountain range and came to the border of the great Qin dynasty to welcome them. The change in Shushan would first affect the situation in the southern wilderness. After communication, Xiao Yan, Zhu Yi, Shi Tianhao, and the others basically believed that the Big Dipper Sword Venerable should be trustworthy, but it was difficult to predict what would happen to Shushan. If the Big Dipper Sword Venerable was involved from the beginning, and everything was arranged, then the situation would be very serious. While arranging to welcome the great Qin dynasty cultivators, Xiao Yan had already moved towards Shushan. However, in the case of unclear situation, it was not good to show obvious distrust of the Shushan sword sect, which had performed well in the war between the two worlds, especially when the Big Dipper Sword Venerable had returned to Shushan personally. Therefore, after discussion, as the direct disciple of Xianmen Tianzong's swordsmanship, Luo Qingwu, who had a high status but a low cultivation, was arranged to go to Shushan to observe the ceremony and find out what was going on. Zhuge Zhan, an expert of the Dao integration realm, would accompany her, and Xiao Yan would wait for news at the border of western Shu. Looking at Luo Qingwu, Shi Tianhao said seriously, "Little junior sister, this arrangement is actually risky. Although big senior brother is looking after you outside, and second senior brother may also rush to Shushan, if someone really takes the risk out of desperation, the safety of you and Mr. Zhuge is not guaranteed." What he said was naturally referring to the worst possibility, which was that something had happened to the Big Dipper Sword Venerable, and everything had been a trap from the beginning. As long as nothing happened to the Big Dipper Sword Venerable, even if something happened to the Big Dipper Sword Venerable, the Big Dipper Sword Venerable could still suppress him, at least so that the situation would not be completely out of control. The two strongest experts of Shushan, the Big Dipper Sword Venerable and the Big Dipper Sword Venerable, had no time to deal with Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan, so in the face of other people of Shushan, Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan could protect themselves. At the very least, they could hold on until Xiao Yan rushed over. Luo Qingwu looked at Shi Tianhao and solemnly cupped her fists. "Little senior brother, I understand. I will be careful." Shi Tianhao looked at Zhuge Zhan. "Mr. Zhuge, please take care of my little junior sister. Thank you for making this trip to Shushan." Zhuge Zhan waved his hand. "Don't mention it. Since I have joined our sect, these things are just part of my duty. I have always been a loose person. Your master and everyone have always let me do as I please. Now that the situation is tense, I will naturally not do as I please." After the two sides said goodbye, Shi Tianhao and Great Sage Lu Yuan continued to go to West Hill City, while Zhuge Zhan and Luo Qingwu went to Shushan. The younger disciples of the sect still went to the Kunlun mountain range. They first met up with Xiao Yan, and then returned to Yunfeng Mirror Lake. Zhuge Zhan used his rainbow soaring escape technique. The divine light of the sun turned into a long rainbow and took Luo Qingwu to Shushan. When they were near the boundary of the first generation of Mount Shu, Zhuge Zhan stopped in his tracks and looked at the void in the distance with a solemn expression. Luo Qingwu also looked in that direction and saw a magnificent white light piercing through the sky. The huge white light pillar covered a vast area and enveloped the whole of Mount Shu, as if it was an independent world. Although Luo Qingwu's cultivation was low, she could clearly feel the terrifying sword will contained in the white light, as if it was going to split the sky and earth. The sword will of the fairy heaven sword. Luo Qingwu also frowned slightly and looked up at the void where the white light led. "Mr. Zhuge, there seems to be someone fighting there." Zhuge Zhan nodded. "Two extremely powerful sword cultivators. It seems that they are Sword Master Tiangang and Sword Master Tsangming." Luo Qingwu murmured to herself, "Is there really something wrong with Sword Master Tsangming?" Although she said that, Luo Qingwu's brows relaxed. An internal conflict between the two giants of Shushan at least meant that the worst possibility had not happened. She carefully stared at the white light that seemed to be formed by endless sword qi and sword will. "This is the Nine Heavens Primordium Sword Formation. No, the Immortal Primordium Sword Formation? I see. Sword Master Tsangming used the foundation laid by Sword Master Tiangang to reforge the Fairy Heaven sword with the power of the sword formation." Zhuge Zhan snorted. "The control of this sword formation is probably in Sword Master Tsangming's hands. That's why he can fight with Sword Master Tiangang." Luo Qingwu stared at the Immortal Primordium sword formation and said slowly, "Although the power of the sword formation has been extracted, the Fairy Heaven sword is still being reforged. It can actually be used for two purposes at the same time. I'm afraid the price is to extract the power of other sword sects' great formations on a larger scale." She also knew the basic principles of the Immortal Primordium sword formation. After careful observation, she had a rough idea. Zhuge Zhan said, "Sword Master Tiangang is being held back by Tsangming. If this continues, the situation will only worsen. Inform Xiao Yan to come over. I will make the first move. Although Sword Master Tsangming could borrow the power of the immortal primordium sword formation to resist Sword Master Tiangang, he had to fight with Sword Master Tiangang and forge the sword at the same time. In the face of other changes, he could not afford to be distracted. If the immortal primordium sword formation was broken or affected, Sword Master Tsangming would not have enough power to resist Sword Master Tiangang. Zhuge Zhan raised his fist. Immediately, there was a dazzling radiance, like a blazing sun rising. Then, he brazenly smashed towards the white light before him. A low, thunderous voice suddenly rang out. Xianmen Tianzong? That was Sword Master Tsangming's voice. He was currently fighting with Sword Master Tiangang in the void. The battle between the two strongest sword cultivators of the Shushan sword sect's current generation had turned the Void Realm into a mess. Sword Master Tsangming's cultivation level was only one step away from the Dharma ending realm. Although he could not reach his peak after reconstructing his sword heart, he was not far from it. He was very powerful. However, he was still no match for Sword Master Tiangang, who had already reached the Dharma ending realm. Fortunately, he had the help of the immortal primordium sword formation. Sword Master Tiangong's injuries from fighting the Kunlun Dragon King had not fully recovered, which was why Sword Master Tsangming could withstand the attack. Sword Master Tiangang looked at Sword Master Tsangming in front of him and pursed his lip. His consciousness reverberated in the space. Tsangming, stop. Sword Master Tiangang could not bear to use the power of the Dharma ending tribulation in the face of this junior brother whom he had known for 10,000 years. With his attainments in the way of the sword and his cultivation level, he could tell at a glance that Sword Master Tsangming was the same as the Jade Sky Dragon King not long ago. They were both only one Dharma ending tribulation away from completing the initial tribulation. However, given Sword Master Tsangming's current state, there was no other possibility for him to survive the Dharma ending tribulation. Unlike the Jade Sky Dragon King, who could still fight, Sword Master Tsangming was destined not to survive this final tribulation. Sword Master Tsangming looked at Sword Master Tiangang calmly. Senior brother Tiangang, I won't be the one to use the immortal heavenly sword's reforging. That would just be a pearl covered in dust. After this sword is forged, it will definitely be you who will control it in the dangerous environment of the war between the two realms. As he spoke, Sword Master Tsangming suddenly waved his hand and shot a stream of light into the immortal primordium sword formation. Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper focused his eyes and saw a figure in that stream of light. Chapter 1207. The figure was wrapped in a stream of light and fell into the immortal grand primordium sword array. Sword Venerable Tiangang looked over and saw that it was a young man in black. The young man had not lost consciousness, but he could not do anything about his current situation. However, his expression was calm and his eyes were calm. He did not seem to panic. Sword Venerable Tiangang did not recognize the young man before him, but after scanning him with his divine sense, he immediately noticed something was wrong. The young man's body seemed to contain a vigorous sword intent that seemed illusory yet tangible, making one's heart palpitate. Although Sword Venerable Tiangang had not come into contact with the sword intent that seemed as grand as the sky, he had heard of it for a long time. The ancient Heavenly Gates Great Jiutian Sword? It's not just the sword intent, it also contains other existences. This feeling, even though Sword Venerable Tiangang had always been calm and composed, and there were few things that could make him lose his composure, he could not help but change his expression at this moment. The rumored Great Jiutian Sword that has not been forged but already has a foundation? He looked at Sword Venerable Firmament in shock. Where did you find such a person? Sword Venerable Firmament said calmly, After you left for Infinite Wilderness, I also left Shu Mountain and wandered around. He looked at Ji Wenrui, Sword Venerable Li Meng, and Sword Venerable Shaoyang on Shu Mountain. You should know that after I reforged my sword heart and recovered my cultivation, Wenrui and the others would not be able to detect anything if I really wanted to hide it. Wenrui sending Shaoyang to monitor me was futile. Sword Venerable Firmament shook his head. Back then, I had yet to completely stabilize my state of mind, and there were still many doubts in my heart. As such, I simply left the great thousand worlds and did not stay in the divine continent, nor did I go to the infinite wilderness like you did. I just wandered around aimlessly in the void of the heavens. Who would have thought that I would see this lad using the great Jiutian sword Dao to kill demons in a medium-sized world? He was quite cautious and avoided everyone, leaving no survivors at the scene. However, he was only a Yuanian cultivator. How could he detect my presence? I saw it, and out of curiosity, I took him. After careful inspection, I realized that he not only cultivated the great Jiutian sword Dao, but also had the sword shadow of the ancient heavenly gates, unforged great Jiutian sword, and had already refined it halfway. Empyrean Firmament laughed. No matter if it's the Void Temple, us, or others, we've all searched for the ninth heaven sword for so many years, wearing out iron shoes to no avail. In the end, we found it without any effort at all. I'm also very surprised. He looked around at the dark void. It seems that the true meaning of the Grand Tao exists in the unseen world. It's time for my sect's immortal heaven sword to reappear. Sword Venerable Firmament's expression was slightly gloomy as he spoke. The Master of the Celestial Gate used his sword Dao to send our sect's celestial sword into destruction, so we can't reforge it at all. Heavenly Sword Sword Tong. Of Sword Sect Sword of God, Origin. Of the Peak, Sage was Peak, but Tian Heaven, and God of the Tao, Li was a Zhang of Chun. Sword Lord Firmament shook his head. Although Thunderbolt, Heavenly Sword, and the others have made breakthroughs, the source of their progress is still the heavenly immortal sword Qi of Shushan. However, the Nine Heavens sword is different. Only by sacrificing this incomplete sword can we truly reforge the celestial heaven sword and make it even more powerful. The young man trapped in the flowing light was Chu Yang of Beyond Heaven Mountain. Celestial Dipper Sword Venerable looked at Chu Yang in surprise. This kid actually possesses the ninth heaven sword? The ninth heaven sword has reappeared? Sword Exalt Firmament said, this sword has yet to be completely refined. At this moment it's still fused with this young man's soul. If we didn't intentionally check it, we wouldn't be able to detect such a secret even if we swept a glance over it normally. However, now that it's sealed by my sword Qi, everything is clear to me. Big Dipper Sword Venerable scanned Chu Yang's entire body with his divine sense. Suddenly, his eyebrows twitched. Apart from the great Nine Heavens divine sword Dao, he also has the fusion of the Blood River Path and the sword Dao? But the foundation of his Dao is from Beyond Heaven Mountain. To Big Dipper Sword Venerable, Beyond Heaven Mountain was so insignificant that it wasn't even worth mentioning. Even though Beyond Heaven Mountain had been a medium to small force that was most dependent on Xianmen Tianzong, it still wasn't worth the attention of experts like him and Sect Exalt Firmament. However, they, who were experienced and knowledgeable, roughly knew the Tao of most of the sects in the world. Usually, they didn't take it to heart and wouldn't occupy their mental memory. However, once there was a need, they could immediately dig out the information they needed from their sea of consciousness. Sword Exalt Firmament nodded. That's right. This kid is indeed from Beyond Heaven Mountain. Who would have thought that a little dragon would actually be nurtured in a muddy pond that can't even be considered shallow? Beyond Heaven Mountain has been following Xianmen Tianzong closely all these years. Others might not be able to see the abnormality of this kid, but the master of the celestial sect would definitely be able to see it. However, he had always left this sword with this young man and didn't take care of him, leaving him to fend for himself. However, I've encountered him today. Everything is the will of the heavens. Sword Exalt Firmament laughed. I've already checked. This kid doesn't have any traps left behind by the master of the celestial sect. Today is indeed the day our sect's celestial sword returns to the vast thousand worlds. Sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper looked at him as if he was looking at a complete stranger. Junior Brother Firmament, have you completely lost confidence in our sect's Sword Tao? You're the same as Luo Shirtu back then. Sword Exalt Firmament shook his head. I've never lost confidence in our sect's celestial sword Qi. However, blind persistence and confidence are merely arrogance. Why can't all rivers flow into the sea? Sword Exalt Firmament pursed his lips tightly and didn't make a sound. However, his consciousness reverberated in the void. It's fine for the sea to flow into the sea. However, in the depths of your heart, the sea is no longer the sea. Sword Exalt Firmament said indifferently, Senior Brother Heavenly Dipper, there's no point in talking too much. The truth will prove that I'm right. Sword Exalt Firmament held the ancient Sword Exalt Firmament in his right hand and formed a sword seal with his left hand. Chu Yang's figure had already disappeared from the celestial sword formation. The white light that filled the sky became increasingly vast. Sword Exalt Firmament pointed the sword in his right hand. Instantly, a sword light that resembled the blue sky of the underworld spread out and swept towards Sword Exalt Firmament. Originally, they had already left the vast thousand worlds and were in the endless void. However, at this moment, the two of them seemed to be shrouded in a blue sky. Meanwhile, the radiance of the celestial sword formation fused with Sword Exalt Firmament's sword intent, causing its power to increase greatly. Sword Exalt Firmament was expressionless. He also shook the ancient Sword Exalt Firmament in his hand. Immediately, a river of stars streaked across the sky and clashed with Sword Exalt Firmament's sword intent. However, after Chu Yang and the Ninth Heaven Sword were sent into the celestial sword formation, the sword formation's power clearly changed. While it became shaky and unstable, it also became more profound and powerful. The power of the 9 major sword sects' grand array formations was continuously absorbed into the heavenly immortal grand beginning sword formation. The power of each sect's grand array formations had already surpassed its previous limit. This made the original owners of the grand array formations even more suspicious. Within the celestial sword formation, the sound of swords being sharpened became louder and louder. The increasingly powerful sword intent spread out, as if it wanted to turn the surrounding area into a world of sword qi. Meanwhile, Zhuge Zhan, who was currently attacking the celestial sword formation, immediately sensed the change in the situation. His pair of faint golden brows furrowed. The sword formation's power has increased. While it's helping Sword Exalt Firmament to fight against Sword Exalt Firmament, it still has excess power to deal with my attack. This old man was also someone with a bad temper. When he saw this, he immediately retracted his hands in front of his chest. His hand seals changed continuously, and thousands of rays of Sun Divine Light gathered around him, manifesting his Sun Divine Light Tao fruit. Zhuge Zhan's Sun Divine Light Tao fruit flew into the sky, and the sky suddenly opened up, revealing the solar star. The heavens and the earth darkened, and powerful power kept surging. This was the most powerful mystique that Zhuge Zhan had cultivated, the radiant sun Saint Leaf. The endless heavens and earth, the vast void, the sea of stars, and the Milky Way all seemed to be hidden in darkness at this moment, as if they had never existed. Only the sun was the only glory, the only truth, the supreme light, and the supreme ruler. On the land of Shushan, apart from the white light of the celestial sword formation, there was only darkness. It was as if it had fallen into an eternal night, and there was no other light. All that could be seen was a brilliant beam of light coming straight down from the sky. Zhuge Zhan flipped his palm, and the scorching sun battle spear appeared in his hand. He then guided the brilliant light of the radiant sun Saint Leaf and unleashed a powerful attack on the celestial sword formation. Although the celestial sword formation was powerful, most of its power was used to assist swordsman Firmament and swordsman Tiangang in their battle. At this moment, when Zhuge Zhan's spear pierced it, the vast white light was forcibly torn open. Outside the bounded domain, swordsman Firmament's eyes turned slightly cold. Although I don't want to completely fall out with Xianmen Tianzong now, at this point, as he was thinking, swordsman Tiangong's sword will and sword qi suddenly became even more violent. Swordsman Tiangong's voice rang in his ear. Firmament, don't force me to kill you. Everything will be different after today's success. If you fail today, if you don't kill me, Taiyin, and the others, there will naturally be others who want to take our lives. When that time comes, what will happen to you, Wenrui, and the others? Swordsman Firmament roared. As he waved his sword to fight swordsman Tiangang, he pointed at the celestial sword formation. The power of the sword formation circulated more and more rapidly, but it was not to attack Zhuge Zhan. Instead, it was to further activate the formation to reforge the celestial sword. Swordsman Firmament said coldly, I don't care if I die under your sword or in the hands of others. However, if the celestial sword is not reborn, I will not die in peace. The two elders with the highest cultivation and seniority in Shu Mountain were currently fighting in the void above the celestial sword formation. Meanwhile, on the divine land below, after Zhuge Zhan forcefully broke a corner of the sword formation, the rolling white light once again attacked him forcefully. The divine light of the sun around Zhuge Zhan turned into a rainbow of 7 colors, blurring the boundary between reality and illusion, and blocking the white light outside. Just now, he had used the powerful explosive power of the radiant sun Saint Leaf to temporarily tear a hole in the sword formation. However, if he could not continue forward, the powerful and heavy sword formation would ultimately be more durable than him. Chapter 1208. Zhuge Zhan turned to look at Luo Qingwu as he sensed the surging and sharp sword will in the sword formation of heavenly Taichu before him. I'm now in a stalemate with the power of the sword formation, and neither of us can do anything to the other in the short term. Even though you've yet to form a primordial soul, your magical powers and cultivation far surpass that of ordinary nascent soul cultivators, so you might be able to do something. I'll help you withstand the pressure from the sword formation. Luo Qingwu nodded solemnly. Eldest senior brother is already on his way, but the situation is changing rapidly. Maybe I'm overestimating myself, but I have no choice but to try my best. Thank you, Mr. Zhuge. Once the Fairy Heaven Sword was reforged, the result of the battle between Tiangang's Sword Master and Songming's Sword Master would be unpredictable. Although they didn't know how long it would take for the Fairy Heaven Sword to be reforged, the sword energies of the Thunderbolt Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sword Sect were constantly being absorbed. If this situation continued, the losses would only increase. Not to mention that Tiangang's Sword Master had left the Southern Wilderness Region passage, leaving only Zhu Yi to confront Shen Long King. If Shen Long King saw through him, he would immediately attack. Luo Qingwu took a deep breath. Suddenly, there was a flash of light above her head, and a tall shadow of a giant appeared above her body. The giant was pure black, with 4 heads and 8 arms. The 8 arms reached into the void, stirring up the 8 trigrams of heaven, earth, wind, thunder, water, fire, mountain, and swamp. The 4 heads were blurry, but in the void in front of each face, there was a sword floating. Some were formless like flowing winds, some were burning like raging flames, some were rippling like water, and some were as heavy as the earth. The giant didn't show much sharpness, but it seemed to resonate with the whole world. It was different from the Fairy Heaven Sword Qi turning all things in the world into a sword, and also different from the Heaven Punishment Sword Qi turning all the evil Qi in the world into a sword. The shadow of the giant seemed to see all things in the world as swords, but it didn't fit with them. Instead, it formed a special resonance. They were independent but accompanied each other. Silently, a dot of light flickered between the eyebrows of the four heads, cold and silent. The giant was none other than Luo Qingwu's avatar of heaven and earth when she reached the late yuanying stage. The pitch-black, ice-cold profound clear sword fell into Luo Qingwu's pure white, jade-like palm. She drew the tip of the sword, and the sound of ocean tides immediately resounded between heaven and earth. At the same time, a sword hovering in the void in front of one of the faces of the huge heaven and earth avatar also began to vibrate. A boundless black ocean appeared between heaven and earth, turning into roaring black waves that lifted Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan up and carried them forward. The seawater was boundlessly cold, bone-piercingly cold, as if it could devour all light. It was extremely cold, and extremely dark. Countless huge black ice swords, the tips of which were the size of small mountains, rose from the black tide and slashed at the sword formation of heavenly primordium with an earth-shattering force. In front of Luo Qingwu's avatar of heaven and earth, the tide-like swords seemed to be dancing in the void at this moment, creating a unique sense of beauty. Zhuge unleashed his own magical powers to resist the white light of the sword formation of the immortal heaven of primordium. Then, he and Luo Qingwu followed the endless black tide and advanced into the depths of the sword formation of the immortal heaven of primordium. The sword light was as cold as the ocean. It was the nine-in ocean sword of Luo Qingwu's great four elephants' immortal slaying swords. The pitch-black, ice-cold edge of the endless tide carried Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan forward into the depths of the sword formation. Zhuge Zhan looked at Luo Qingwu with some surprise. This little girl. Although he had been a guest elder of Xianmen Tianzong for many years and had contact with Luo Qingwu from time to time, Zhuge Zhan had never seen Luo Qingwu fight with all her might. Now that he saw it, he could not help but be surprised. Although I knew that her magic power was far beyond that of an ordinary late yuanying cultivator, isn't this too much? It's different from the sect leader's heaven-punishing sword qi, different from the Shu Mountain sword principle, and different from any other sword principle in the world before Luo Qingwu unfolded the nine-in ocean sword and continued to advance into the depths of the sword formation. At this moment, light flashed within the sword formation. Suddenly, a sword light flashed, stabbing toward Luo Qingwu's head. The sword light was so fast that it seemed to have completely surpassed the barriers of space. In the blink of an eye, it had already arrived in front of Luo Qingwu. The Shaozi Sword Division of Shu Mountain. The person controlling the sword was a middle-aged man with an elegant face and a smile. He was one of the 6 lineages of Shu Mountain Sword Division, the Sword Master and Sect Master of the Shaozi Sword Division. This old man had cultivated his spirit to return to the void, but during the Xian Annihilation Battle, his Dharma body was shattered by Luo Qingwu's senior brother, Shi Tianhao, and he fell back to the primordial spirit incarnation stage. Although he was still the Sword Master Grandmaster of the Shaozi Sword Division after recovering from his injuries, he was still the most powerful person in the Shaozi Sword Division. However, he did not know when he would be able to cultivate his spirit to return to the void again. Although he still had a smile on his face, it was a bit strange no matter how one looked at it. His elegant face was even slightly distorted. The celestial heaven sword of our sect is about to be reforged. How can we let you delay it? How can we let you delay it? How can we let anyone delay it? Junior Sword Master shouted in a low voice. His body suddenly shook and the void around him twisted. Countless spaces overlapped, surrounding Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan. The overlapping spaces were like layers of sparkling transparent walls, yet they were also like mirrors. The figures of the Junior Sword Honorable could be seen in these mirrors, and they were unpredictable and difficult to distinguish. However, Luo Qingwu knew that Junior Sword Master had pushed the power of the Shaozi sword division to its limit. It was not the Tao of transformation between real and fake, but an extremely superior Tao Dharma in the principles of space and time. At this moment, it was as if he was standing in many layers of space and time at the same time, representing countless possibilities. They were erratic, but each possibility was real. As the Junior Sword Venerable bellowed, many figures charged toward Luo Qingwu together. At the same time, the white light produced by the celestial heaven sword formation was also shining, pressuring Zhuge so that he could not spare any energy to take care of Luo Qingwu. Zhuge eyebrows furrowed. As he sneered, the colorful light around him suddenly changed and became a blazing sun again. It exploded in all directions, blocking out all the white light. He took this opportunity to look at Luo Qingwu. However, Luo Qingwu did not stop moving. She continued to move the 9 vast ocean sword to guide the two of them forward, and at the same time, she swung the profound Che sword in her hand in the void. Waves of fierce, invisible wind shot out from the tip of the sword. Countless gusts of wind folded and compressed, condensed to the extreme, turning invisible and formless into bright celestial wind sword light. These celestial wind sword light turned in the void and became invisible again. They gathered and scattered in the void. The sword light was unpredictable, and its whereabouts were uncertain. It was invisible and formless, but it was also full of a sense of perfection and invincible sharpness. The celestial wind sword light rose into the void. It was the celestial wind sword light, the celestial wind sword light. Moreover, it was the celestial returning sword that Luo Qingwu had already deduced to the extreme. It was the 81 invisible sword light. As they crisscrossed, the sword light was unpredictable and difficult to see, but it seemed to be everywhere, covering the entire void. The Junior Sword Venerable's attacks from all directions were all blocked by the invisible sword light, unable to advance an inch. In the Dharma form of heaven and earth above Luo Qingwu's head, a sword that seemed to be condensed from formless flowing wind was dancing in the void in front of one of its faces. It was resonating with the formless sword light that was invisible and omnipresent between heaven and earth from a distance. As the Junior Sword Venerable was shocked, he heard Luo Qingwu say silently, "Break." Before she finished speaking, the invisible sword light suddenly counterattacked. The 81 invisible sword light seemed to suddenly merge into one, but also seemed to become endless and difficult to count. But in the blink of an eye, the Junior Sword Venerable, who seemed to be in thousands of worlds, was attacked by countless invisible sword light at the same time. With a muffled groan, the Junior Sword Venerable's figure fell backward. The walls formed by the folded space that sealed Luo Qingwu and Zhuge were all broken. The folded space that seemed like a sparkling and transparent wall was like a broken ice surface, cracking continuously. Even the figure of the Junior Sword Venerable was broken one by one. All the space shattered together. The figure of the Junior Sword Venerable gradually returned to one. He switched the sword to his left hand, and his right hand was cut off at the wrist. Light spilled from the wound like blood. The Junior Sword Venerable looked up and stared at the girl in purple in front of him. He was shocked and angry that the Junior Sword Venerable he had cultivated had been defeated like this. He recognized the girl in front of him as Luo Qingwu, the youngest disciple of the celestial sect Master Lin Feng. He also knew that this girl specialized in swordsmanship among Lin Feng's disciples. But he also knew that Luo Qingwu did not directly follow Lin Feng to practice the heaven-punishing sword qi, which shamed all Shushan sword cultivators. To be precise, under the guidance of Lin Feng, Luo Qingwu used the Book of Tao as a basis to practice and comprehend her own swordsmanship. If she had been defeated by the heaven-punishing sword qi, the Junior Sword Venerable could still accept it. But at this moment, she had lost to the swordsmanship that Luo Qingwu practiced. She had lost to the sword of a Yuanian cultivator at the primordial spirit realm. This made the junior sword venerable feel dizzy. Shushan's swordsmanship is not to be taken lightly. Don't be arrogant, little brat. Take this. A roar rang out, and a stream of sword light flew towards Luo Qingwu with the power to split the sky. The endless sword qi and sword will were compressed together into a sword light that was thousands of feet long. The sword light was completely condensed, like a peerless divine sword. It stretched across the sky, incomparably condensed, incomparably violent. It was the junior Shang sword venerable. The original junior Shang sword venerable of the Shushan sword sect had been captured by Lin Feng and placed on the Xiantian God sealing banner. At this moment, the person who appeared before Luo Qingwu was the new junior Shang sword venerable after the Battle of Shushan. Although he had not yet refined his spirit to return to the void, his cultivation was already the strongest in the Shushan sword sect's junior Shang sword sect. At this moment, he pushed the power of his swordsmanship to the limit and attacked fiercely towards Luo Qingwu. Luo Qingwu looked up at him and said dispassionately, "Although I was once defeated by my master, I still admire the swordsmanship of Mount Shu very much. However, people like you are not included in this list." As she spoke, she held the Xianche sword in her right hand. With a wave of her left hand, a bamboo cane appeared in midair. Chapter 1209. That huge bamboo staff, following the light tap of Luo Qingwu's finger, rapidly shrunk to less than 1 foot in length. The thickness was also just enough to hold a grip. The entire appearance was like a sword hilt without a blade or chin. Luo Qingwu's left hand grabbed the hilt-like bamboo staff, then aimed it at the new generation's little Shang, venerable of Shushan, who was rapidly attacking her. At the tip of the Seven Treasures bamboo fire staff, in her hand, there was a flash of blue fire. The constantly leaping fire actually condensed into a sword edge about 1 foot long at the tip of the Seven Treasures bamboo fire staff. After the Uxidagarba true brilliance, the pure Yang true fire, the true extreme Yang fire and the Nanming Li fire, appeared one after another. They each transformed into a different colored sword edge. Almost in the blink of an eye, it had formed a 4-foot-long sword edge. An extremely terrifying explosive power came from within, causing the face of the little Shang venerable to instantly change. One sword holding up the 7 divine blades, the great 4 elephants immortal slaying sword, the 7 flames heaven-raising sword. It was not as powerful as the 9 vast ocean sword, not as agile as the formless wind sword, but its pure killing power and explosive power was above these 2 swords. Gathering the 7 great true fires and refining it into a 7-foot sword edge, this was the peak of this sword. It was only because of Luo Qingwu's current cultivation and the fact that the 7 Treasures bamboo fire staff could only hold a 4-foot sword edge for now. But even so, this terrifying sword also caused the expression of the little Shang venerable to change. Almost in the blink of an eye, he had already manifested his primordial spirit. His entire person transformed into a 10-meter long, as wide as a door, heavy and forceful, fierce and tyrannical giant bronze sword. It combined with the forceful sword light emitted by the little Shang sword, becoming even more forceful. It met with Luo Qingwu's 7 flames heaven-raising sword. His little Shang's sword was famed for its forcefulness and fierceness. Defense was not its forte. Only by directly meeting force with force would there be a chance of victory. The boundless sword light of the little Shang's sword was like the Milky Way, vast and mighty, with no end in sight. The mere 4-foot-long heavenly flames heaven-raising sword, in front of it, seemed completely out of proportion, as insignificant as a needle. But the moment the 2 sides made contact, green, milky white, pure gold that was like needles, and gold that flashed with red and blue lights, as well as raging flames, exploded together. The light of fire rose and fell, bringing with it a destructive power. Under the urging of the sharp sword intent, it transformed into a gigantic heaven-cleaving sword with an aura even more ferocious and vast than the Little Shang sword, clashing with the sword light of the Little Shang sword. The dazzling and condensed sword light that was like the Milky Way was cut in half by the huge sword that was condensed from flames. The sword light shattered, and the vigorous and ferocious sword chi and sword intent shot out in all directions. However, before they could really spread out, they were engulfed by the sea of fire and burned to ashes. Amidst the raging flames, there was Luo Qingwu's sword will, which merged with the raging flames and spread out to the surroundings. With a low ringing sound, the Little Shang primordial spirit that had transformed into a huge bronze sword struggled to charge out of the sea of fire. But the sword was covered in cracks like a spider web. Although each crack seemed very small, when these cracks were densely packed together, it caused the originally ferocious and powerful sword to seem like a fragile piece of porcelain. There was a flash of light on the surface of the huge sword, and the spider web-like cracks instantly disappeared. The blade of the sword became smooth again. But the originally bright sword light on the sword also disappeared. The entire sword seemed to have suddenly become old and decayed, no longer sharp. The primordial spirit of the Little Shang primordial spirit once again reappeared in human form. His face was as pale as paper, and his eyes had lost their light. He looked in shock at Luo Qingwu. After the Little Shang primordial spirit, he had actually been defeated by the sword of the girl in front of him without any suspense. And the divine swordsmanship that the other party had displayed was completely different from the formless sword of the sky wind. After the Little Shang primordial spirit, the nimble and agile formless sword of the sky wind had broken Shushan's fastest sword, Luo Qingwu had once again met force with force. She had used the ferocious and violent Seven Fires heaven-raising sword to break Shushan's most powerful Little Shang sword. The Little Shang primordial spirit and the Little Shang primordial spirit stared at Luo Qingwu. This purple-clothed girl in front of them seemed ordinary, as if she had never had any edge to speak of. But just now, she had displayed a restrained, domineering and arrogant air. Defeating the opponent in the area that she was most proficient in. It was the same spirit that her master, Lin Feng, had when he had stepped into Shushan and met with the experts of Shushan. Little girl, do you want to imitate your master back then, and know all the swords of my Shushan? It's a pity that you don't have the same strength as your master. A thin middle-aged man appeared within the immortal heavenly sword formation of primordial beginning, his gaze fixed on Luo Qingwu. The sword chi around him was like mist and illusion, soft and flexible. He was the sword master grandmaster of the Great Yin Swords, one of the 6 meridians of Shushan, the Great Yin Swordsman. However, compared to the past, the current Great Yin Swordsman's gaze was a little gloomy, giving off an ominous feeling. After the previous Little Shang primordial spirit was captured on Xianmen Tianzong's black heavenly god sealing banner, and after the Shaozi and Guanchong swordsmen's return to void Dharma bodies were shattered, there were only 3 return to void cultivators left among the original 6 meridians of Shushan. They were the previous sword master Ji Wenrui of the Minor Sun, Ji Wenrui of the Minor Sun, and sword master Li of the Great Yin. The Great Yin swordsman stared coldly at Luo Qingwu. Luo Qingwu's expression was calm, and she said indifferently, I naturally can't compare to my master, and I can't compare to senior brother Xiao Yan. However, time and tide wait for no man. I have to do my best. Please enlighten me, Great Yin swordsman. Hearing Luo Qingwu's words, the Great Yin swordsman's eyebrows twitched. On the eve of the exterminating Xian War, during the incident at Beyond Heaven Mountain, with his return to void cultivation, he was no match for Xiao Yan of the late Yuanying realm. Xiao Yan blasted his defense open with one palm strike, and he was even struck by Zen Master Dade's great liberation Zen light. If it weren't for the protection of the Tao Integration Realm Grand Elders Sword Intent and Sword Chi, it would have been difficult for him to even escape. At this moment, the person who appeared before him was another personal disciple of the Xian Gate sects, master of the late Yuanying realm. The great Yin swordsman unleashed his sword power, and his sword intent and sword chi transformed into a white mist. Within the mist there were layers of chi threads that were thinner than hair, and there were billions of them, entangled together. Every single thread was condensed from the sword will and sword chi of the Taiyin sword. They were extremely flexible and tough. As they swayed in the air, it was as if they had their own thoughts and lives. They gathered together like clouds and mist. The great Yin swordsman said coldly, "Today you asked for it." As he spoke, a large number of air threads shot down towards Luo Qingwu in an overwhelming manner, as though they were a violent storm. Luo Qingwu unfolded her 9 vast sea sword, and the black tide seemed endless, trapping the billions of strands of air. The seawater, which was extremely cold and dark, was like an icy hell, freezing all the strands of air that shot into it. At this moment, the black tide seemed to split into countless streams of water, and countless sword intents gathered together, attacking the great Yin swordsman with equal harshness. The great Yin swordsman's eyes were cold, and his expression darkened. If he was also at the primordial spirit incarnation realm, like Sword Venerate Shaozi and Sword Venerate Shaoshang, then it was very likely that he would be defeated by Luo Qingwu's sword. As for what the result would be if they were also at the late Yuanying realm, the great Yin swordsman did not even have the time to think about it. He made a sword gesture, and the chi threads condensed from the great Yin swordsman became more and more agile, and their number also increased. They came one after another, as if they were going to directly fill up the black ocean formed by Luo Qingwu's 9 vast ocean sword. Luo Qingwu's eyes flickered slightly. After all, he is a great sword cultivator of the Void Return realm. She used the profound clear sword's edge in her right hand as she withdrew the bamboo fire staff of 7 treasures with her left hand. She pinched a sword spell, and a dim icy blue sword light lit up. A pale white brilliance faintly appeared in the black sea, circulating ceaselessly. The rolling waves suddenly paused, and then instantly turned into a glacier. Within the icy blue glacier, a pale white light flashed. The great 4 elephants' immortal slaying sword, the 9 vast ocean sword, the innate 6 directions swordsmanship, and the 10 lands absolute Yin sword. The 2 swords combined into one, and the cold and silent sword intent immediately spread out. The blue glacier that flashed with a pale white light transformed into a huge ice sword, and instantly swept through the void, freezing a large number of chi threads formed by the great Yin swordsman. These chi threads that were frozen into ice crystals also turned into dust in the next moment, and disappeared without a trace. In the next moment the ice sword shattered, and a dot of red light appeared in front of the great Yin swordsman in an instant, making him feel an extreme chill from the bottom of his heart. Connate 6 directions sword Dao, Dongfang Shaoyin sword. Countless chi threads gathered in front of the great Yin swordsman's glabella, and they quickly circled around, intercepting the dazzling red light. The red light continued to pierce through the obstruction of the chi threads, and as the chi threads were broken and destroyed, new chi threads would constantly replace them, wearing away at the red light. The great Yin swordsman himself was also flying backward, and he barely managed to block Luo Qingwu's Dongfang Shaoyin sword. But very soon Luo Qingwu's sword turned, and streaks of pale brilliance fluttered between heaven and earth, as if there were many long rivers of time. Anyone who stepped into the river would find time fluctuating between fast and slow, making it difficult to grasp. It was indeed the Western Tai Yin sword of the innate 6 directions sword way that Luo Qingwu cultivated. When this sword move met the great Yin swordsman's great Yin swordsman, It immediately caused the chi threads that were originally under the great Een swordsman's control to become less nimble. The great Een swordsman's gaze turned cold, and his sword way changed. The great Een swordsman turned into a lesser Een swordsman, and he escaped from the pale white light of Luo Qingwu's Western Tai Een swordsman. Then, he turned back into the great Een swordsman, and continued to attack Luo Qingwu. The two continued to exchange blows, and the sword chi and sword will crisscrossed, shuttling through the heavenly sword of Primordium. Above the sword formation, Honorable Swordsman Celestial Dipper and Honorable Swordsman Firmament were also fighting fiercely. Honorable Swordsman Firmament was forced to draw on a large amount of the heavenly sword of Primordium's power, which greatly reduced the pressure on Zhuge. Instead, he turned into a rainbow and pulled Luo Qingwu deeper into the sword formation. Seeing this, Honorable Swordsman Shaozi and Honorable Swordsman Shaoshang quickly mustered their remaining courage and attacked again. In the path of Luo Qingwu and Zhuge, another sword light lit up, solemn and deep. It was Honorable Swordsman Guan Chong, blocking their way with the Guan Chong sword. Luo Qingwu's gaze swept across Honorable Swordsman Guan Chong, Honorable Swordsman Shaoshang, and Honorable Swordsman Shaozi. She took a deep breath and held her sword in her right hand, while her left palm was placed in front of her, covering her eyes. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.